The last thing I saw before I died was the sky peeling open like the lid of a tin can. I was standing on the wall of my island city, watching the chaos mist eat the horizon, and my griffins were screaming somewhere above me. I remember thinking, very calmly, that 5 years of my life were about to get deleted along with everything else. The mist rolled over the sea, it rolled over the harbor, it rolled over the 400 players standing on the wall next to me, and every single one of them just stopped existing, the way a save file stops existing. No blood, no bodies, just gone. Then it reached me, and I felt my hand close around the one item I had left, a teardrop of light called the Tears of Asha, the most precious artifact in the entire world of heroes. And I squeezed it like a man squeezing the last juice out of the universe. The universe said, "Fine, one refund, don't waste it." I should tell you the detail from that last day that actually drives everything I did after, more than the deaths, more than the mist. In the final hour, when the front had already collapsed, the fairies of my island, refugees I'd taken in late and carelessly, the way you take in anything in year 5, formed a line at the harbor and sang while they loaded children onto the last boats. Not their own children, anyone's. And the boats were pointless. We all knew the mist would take the sea too. They loaded them anyway, singing that same little song about a village with warm bread in it. And I stood on my wall with all my power and all my knowledge and could not buy those boats 1 extra hour. That's what I carried through the rewind. Not the strategy guide, the song, and the uselessness. And I opened my eyes in a character creation lobby. Let me tell you what those 5 years had been, so you know what I was holding when the rewind hit. I hadn't been a nobody. I'd been Liu Chuan of the island city, guild leader, griffin specialist, the man whose beast lore videos half the server learned the game from. I'd clawed up from launch week with no guide and no backing, made every mistake at full price, buried 2 guilds worth of friendships in the wars, and built something real on the water. And I'd had 5 whole days to enjoy the finished version of my life before the sky opened. 5 days. The universe has comic timing, I'll give it that. So when people ask why I played my second run like a man possessed, the answer is simple bookkeeping. I knew exactly how much a finished life costs, and exactly how fast the repo man flies. Not a metaphor. The actual character creation lobby of World of Heroes, Day 1, Launch Morning, 2041, with the cheerful welcome text floating in front of my face and my whole body 20 years old again. 5 years of the future sitting in my skull like a stolen strategy guide. Every hidden quest, every secret class, including the one nobody ever unlocked, the Architect, the class that doesn't play the world but rebuilds it, and I knew every step on the road to it. Every villain who hadn't done anything evil yet. I stood in that lobby and laughed for a solid minute, and somewhere out there the goddess of fate probably checked her paperwork and went, "Oh no, who let him back in?" Let me explain the game, fast, because everything that happens next only makes sense if you know what this world is. World of Heroes is a full-dive game built on the bones of the oldest strategy formula in existence. You are a hero. You lead troops. 9 great factions carve up the continent of Yasha, castles and towers and dungeons and hells, and every player picks a faction, gets a starter city, and grinds their way up the food chain. Except it's not really a game. The NPCs remember, the world persists, and in 3 years the chaos mist that killed me the first time is going to show up and start eating the map for real. Nobody knows that yet. Nobody except me. One more piece of context, the one that made my studio's gamble a gamble. World of Heroes runs on full dive pods, and its economy bridges to reality. Gold earned in-game trades against real currency on licensed exchanges. At launch, the rate was a joke, 1.5 to 1, because nobody yet believed the game mattered. I knew where that rate was going, because I'd lived through the decade where playing this game well became a profession, then an industry, then, quietly, a matter of national interest. Every hour we spent in those pods was a bet on a future only I had seen, placed with the last of 5 people's savings. No pressure. All the pressure. Both of those sentences were true every single morning. So while 8 million launch day players were picking Castle because knights look cool, I was doing something that made my studio teammates think I'd lost my mind. I made a half-elf. I dumped everything into Charm. The Charm dump had a doctrine behind it, and the doctrine came from 5 years of watching stat-maxed warriors get stonewalled by innkeepers. This world runs on NPCs, and the NPCs are people with memories and moods abilities and favor scores, and every quest, discount, secret, and alliance in the game flows through the narrow pipe of whether somebody likes you. Combat stats level up from fighting. Charm you buy once at the door, and it compounds for the rest of your life like interest at the bank of first impressions. Warriors clear dungeons. Charmers get handed the dungeon's deed by the previous owner's widow. I had receipts on this from a previous existence, and I stacked the stat without 1 gram of shame. And then I hit the random faction button 50 times. See, the random button has a secret. Buried in the odds, thinner than a hair, is a faction that isn't on the list. Not castle, not tower, not hell. Neutral. No allegiance, no starter city, no protection, no discounts, nothing. The forums in my past life called it the trap option, the game's way of punishing gamblers. One player rolled it in 5 years and rage quit within a week. That player never found out what I knew. Neutral is the only faction in the game with no ceiling, no faction lord above you, no racial restrictions on your troops, no god telling you what to build. Everyone else buys a franchise. A neutral player founds a company. Roll 49. Castle. Roll 50. The screen flickered, and the text came up plain and unfriendly. Faction. Neutral. Starting structure. Refugee camp. I should mention what rolls 1 through 49 did to me spiritually. The random button charges a small reroll fee, and the fee scales, so by roll 30 I was funding this lottery with my entire starting purse, and the button, I swear, developed a personality. It gave me castle 4 times in a row at one point, like a waiter repeating the special after I'd declined it. It gave me hell twice, which felt like commentary. Around roll 45, with my funds nearly gone and my faith in probability filing for separation, I did the thing every gambler swears they don't do. I talked to the machine, out loud, in the character lobby. Come on, I told it. You know what I'm here for. We both know. Stop wasting our time. And whether it was the goddess of luck taking an early interest, or the machine getting embarrassed, 5 rolls later the trap option landed. I like to think somewhere in the code a very old flag flipped from never to finally. A refugee camp. My grand empire was starting as a tent city for the homeless. I looked at my starting spawn, which was a muddy clearing with 1 sad campfire, and I looked at my starting troops, which were a handful of centaur archers with second-hand bows, and I felt absolutely fantastic. You little beauty of a mud pit, you have no idea what you're going to grow up to be. The centaur archers deserve an introduction because they carried me on their horsebacks for the first week of this life. Tier 1 troops, technically. Garbage, statistically. Except centaur archers have a speed of 10, which for a starter unit is like finding out your rental scooter has a jet engine, and they shoot while they run. In the hands of a normal player, that means nothing. In the hands of a man who has spent 5 years kiting monsters in this exact engine, that means nothing on this continent gets to touch me unless I write it a formal invitation. First test came before lunch. The system flagged a high difficulty battle, a pack of zombies shambling toward my camp with a few vicious zombies mixed in, the fast kind with the lunge. High difficulty on day 1 is the game telling a newbie to run. I counted my archers, counted the zombies, and did the math of a returning veteran, which goes like this. They walk at speed 4. I ride at speed 10. This is not a battle. It's a treadmill with arrows. Let me paint the actual fight because it set the template for 100 fights after it. The zombies came out of the tree line in a gray wave, moaning their one collective opinion, and the vicious ones loped ahead of the pack with that horrible, eager lean. I pulled my archers back at a walk, not a run. A walk, just fast enough to stay out of lunge range because panic wastes stamina, and I had a full afternoon booked. First volley into the lungers. Second volley into the lungers, because you always finish the fast ones first. That's not strategy, that's hygiene. The vicious zombies went down, snapping at air, and then it was just me, strolling backward across a sunny meadow while 30 bows deleted the slow parade 1 row at a time. At some point, I started narrating it to myself in a nature documentary voice. Here we observe the common zombie migrating directly into an arrow, majestic, doomed. My archer captain, the cliff-faced veteran I'll be mentioning forever, earned his first commendation that day for inventing what became house doctrine, the courtesy volley, which is 1 arrow deliberately loosed over a monster's head to see whether it has the sense to leave. Nothing ever leaves. But he insists on the courtesy, every battle, 1 arrow of pure diplomatic opportunity, and when the monster inevitably charges anyway, he nods with the satisfaction of a man whose paperwork is now in order and gives the real order. Protocol is important to him. The protocol is 1 warning shot and then 140 non-warning shots. A couple of my younger archers actually got bored and started competing for headshots, which I encouraged because morale is a resource and boredom during a high difficulty battle is a flex you can build culture on. 20 minutes later, the field was carpeted with dead zombies, and my casualty report read 0, and the reward wheel popped up, glittering with prizes. The wheel is pure gambling, and I want it on record that I am a serious, disciplined strategist, which is why I bet everything on the picture of a mushroom. The wheel gave me a blueprint. But first, it made me sweat for it. The wheel had a meat section, a gold section, a fat, glittering artifact section, and one tiny sliver with a mushroom on it. The pointer crawled past the gold, kissed the edge of the artifact zone, hesitated like a waiter with bad news, and clicked one notch backward onto the mushroom. Any normal player would have screamed. I pumped my fist so hard I pulled something, because I'd bet on that sliver deliberately. In this game, the humble prizes hide the deep ones, and the mushroom slot is where the wheel keeps its real estate. Earth Fairy Ring, a hidden elemental building, the kind of thing most players wouldn't see until year 2. I couldn't build it yet. I hugged the blueprint anyway. My mud pit had its first piece of furniture. The neighborhood also offered me a treasure chest that week, a proper banded strongbox sitting in a ravine with a lock on it, and I want to confess something for the record. I cannot pick locks. I knew the chest was there from my past life. I hiked an hour to it. I knelt before it with a set of picks and 5 years of theoretical knowledge. And I failed that lock so many times the chest's trap went off out of what I can only assume was pity, singed my eyebrows, and popped open anyway. 500 gold and a lesson in humility, which I spent on more archers, the gold I mean, the humility I put in storage where it remains unused to this day. The recruiting itself, those first days, had a texture worth keeping. My refugee camp offered troops the way a struggling kitchen offers a menu, whatever came in that week. And what came in were centaur archers, with their tribe marks worn shallow, harpies with molted patches, the unit's other factions players would re-roll away from. I signed every one and learned every name. And here's the thing the meta players never discovered because they never stooped to look. Refugee troops carry a hidden gratitude modifier. Not in the stats, in the behavior. A soldier recruited from a tent city fights for the man who gave him a wall like the wall is load-bearing for the world, because for him, it is. My whole military doctrine fell out of that one observation. Recruit the discarded, arm the grateful, renovate everything. I also scouted the wider map that week and made a professional note about the combat dwarves in the Eastern Hills, and the note said, in full, no. Some content is level-gated by numbers, and some content is level-gated by the look the dwarves give you over their axes, and I know the difference, and I rode home at a dignified pace. And then I got to work, because in my head there was a clock ticking that nobody else could hear. 3 years until the mist. Somewhere out west, a little girl I hadn't met yet was going to lose her whole family to a holy war. Somewhere up north, a tower full of mages was grinding fairies into product. And somewhere beneath all of it, the thing that killed 8 million of us was already awake, already patient, already hungry. I picked up my bow, pointed my archers at the nearest monster den, and made myself a promise with a smile on my face. This time, I'm not playing to survive. This time, I'm playing to renovate. The renovations started with a harpy lair. The map flagged it as a siege, high difficulty again, because the lair came with an eagle phantom, a boss-tier bird that dive bombs your ranged units and deletes them before they can blink. Standard counter is bring melee, which I didn't have, or come back in a month, which I wouldn't. So I ran the treadmill again, only vertical this time. Harpies are fast, but harpies are also proud, and a proud enemy chases. I pulled them in a long loop around the rocks, let my archers fire over their shoulders the entire way. And by the time the eagle phantom realized its whole escort was gone, it was alone in the sky, with 30 bows pointed at it like the world's least friendly welcoming committee. The phantom did get one good pass in before the end, I'll give it that. It folded its wings and dropped on my rear squad like a thrown spear, and I had exactly one heartbeat to call the scatter. My archers broke in 6 directions like a school of fish while the bird's shadow swept through the space they'd been standing in. It pulled up screaming, empty-taloned, and I heard my own voice yell up at it, "Sir, this is a delivery route now," and the volley that followed convinced it. When it finally crashed, the whole lair went quiet, and 30 archers looked at each other, counted themselves twice, and started laughing the shaky laugh of people whose casualty report still says 0 and intends to keep saying it. The reward was recruitment rights to harpy hags, which sounds like an insult and is actually a treasure. Harpy hags have one party trick. When they hit you, they steal your speed and add it to theirs. Every slap makes them faster, and you slower. It's the most annoying mechanic in the entire game, and it was now mine. I recruited 3 and named the squad my customer complaints department. The department exceeded all performance targets immediately. Their entire mode of war is to fly at something dangerous, slap it, giggle, and leave with its speed in a bag. And there is no enemy in this world whose composure survives the 3rd slap. Over the coming months, my complaints department would slap, among others, ogre mages, a lich, several heroes, and one creature I'll get to whose title contains the word queen. Their after-action reports, delivered in shrieky chorus, all read the same. He was slow, boss. Then he was slower. Then came the Garden of Truth, a ruin full of gargoyles, including the obsidian kind that shrug off arrows like rain. The gargoyles have a flaw, though. They only see movement, so I parked half my archers as statues, walked the gargoyles onto them with the harpies stealing speed the whole way, and let the ambush do the rest. The statue trick took real nerve, because holding still while an obsidian gargoyle lands on the plinth beside you, stone snout swinging past your face on its search pattern, is a team-building exercise no company should legally run. One of my youngest archers stood eye to eye with the thing for 9 full seconds. Afterward, he claimed he'd winked at it. Afterward, the whole squad claimed they'd winked at it. By winter, the story, as told around my fires, had the entire unit performing synchronized winks at the blind stone monster. And I ruled, as Lord Chief Historian, that the legend was now official. Because morale is also architecture, and some renovations you approve retroactively. The garden paid out a tree spirit bow, an artifact component, and then it revealed its true nature, which is that the Garden of Truth is a quiz venue. 200,000 possible questions about the lore of this world. The average player answers 5 and leaves. I answered 312 in a row, because I have lived here for 5 years, and the garden gave me 3 whole points of knowledge and what I can only describe as a respectful silence. Somewhere in the code, something was updating my file from tourist to problem. My 2 temple spells, I should note here, had begun their long, quiet compounding, exactly as banked. Magic Eye's vision kept deepening as my knowledge climbed, and Magic Fist had already broken the damage tables the guides published for it. And once a week, roughly, with no pattern I could prove, a small anonymous package would reach my camp. A scroll, an odd reagent. Once, just a note reading, "Eat properly, boy." Torvin's Care, the quest log called it, the retired heavyweight keeping his eye on the investment, by mail. I never caught the courier. I stopped trying after the 3rd week, on the theory that you don't audit your grandfather. I want to linger 1 minute on the quiz, because it was the purest fun I'd had since the Rewind. The garden's spirit asked its questions in a voice like turning pages, and the early ones were tourist bait. What color is a gold dragon? And I answered on autopilot while stretching my back. Around question 40, it got suspicious and reached into the deep archive. Name the 3 rivers lost in the second Chaos Invasion. What does a unicorn's horn glow near? In what order did the 9 factions receive their sacred flames? And I just kept answering, because these weren't trivia to me. They were 5 years of my life. Taverns I'd drunk in, rivers I'd drowned enemies in, lore I'd farmed at 3 in the morning for guide videos. Somewhere past question 200, the voice started pausing before each question, the way a chess player pauses when the game stops being casual. At 312, it simply stopped, and the reward chimed, and I swear the silence that followed had the specific texture of a librarian watching someone check out the entire restricted section with a valid card. That evening, the problem file got its first real entry. An emergency escort quest lit up, red border, which means an NPC is about to die for real. A carriage was running hard down the forest road with werewolf howls closing in behind it, wolf summoners riding the pack. And inside the carriage were an old knight named Arthur doing math on how many wolves he could take before dying, and a little girl. Small, maybe 15. Silver hair gone gray with road dust, sitting perfectly straight while the world tried to eat her, holding a toolbox on her lap like it was the last thing she owned. Which, as it turned out, it basically was. I caught the carriage on the 3rd bend, and the tactical picture was ugly in a specific way. Wolf packs don't chase in a line, they chase in a net, and the summoners riding herd were tightening it, 2 packs flanking wide through the trees to get ahead of the horses. Old Arthur had seen it too. I could tell by the way he'd stopped shouting at the driver and started checking his sword, which is the arithmetic of a man planning to be expensive. So I skipped introductions. My archers came out of the tree line at full gallop on the left flank, loosed into the nearest pack mid-stride, and the net tore. The summoners screeched and tried to regather, and that was their mistake, because a summoner calling wolves back is a summoner standing still, and I had 30 riders who specialize in exactly that shape of target. The last summoner managed half of a truly dramatic howl before my aerial arrived, and the howl ended in a note I can only describe as a question. The wolves, suddenly unemployed, remembered other appointments and left. The whole engagement, first arrow to silence, ran maybe 4 minutes, and when I trotted up to the carriage window, old Arthur was looking at me the way a professional looks at an audit that somehow came out in his favor. Her name was Harper. Harper of the Blackwood family, which meant nothing to a launch day player and meant everything to me, because in my past life the Blackwood name was carved on the biggest war memorial in the human lands. Her grandfather was a legend of the Western Front. Her father served under him, and her whole family, in the history I remembered, gets ground up by church politics and a holy war within the year, and this girl ends up alone. Not this time. I dropped my archers into a firing line across the road, gave the wolves the treadmill special, and put an arrow through the last wolf summoner as he was mid-howl, which improved the howl considerably. Arthur the Knight looked at my ragtag centaur cavalry with the expression of a man rewriting his report in real time. Harper looked at me over the edge of her toolbox with enormous eyes and said thank you so quietly I almost missed it. Arthur insisted on formalities before anything else, dismounting despite his years, presenting his house's gratitude in the full old style. And mid-recitation he stopped, squinted at my centaurs, at their mismatched gear and their perfect formation discipline, and asked the question soldiers ask instead of compliments: who trained them? I said they came trained, life trained them, I just gave them a reason. The old man chewed that over, looked at me differently, and skipped the rest of the recitation, which I'm told he had never once done in 40 years of service, and which was, from him, a medal. The quest paid out a knight job change certificate, hidden class material, and one more thing. Harper opened her toolbox, took out a little bracelet of woven silver wire that she'd clearly made herself, and pressed it into my hand. A prayer bracelet, handmade. Appraisal said it was an alchemy treasure with a hidden skill inside, which was ridiculous because alchemy treasures are made by master craftsmen with furnaces, and this was made by a child with pliers. I looked at this girl again, properly this time. The system looked too, and quietly told me what it saw. Talent, treasure maker. Luck +6, inspiration +12. The kid was a hidden legend, a god-blessed crafter riding through a war zone in a broken carriage, and history was planning to throw her away. We rode escort the rest of the way, and I got the story in pieces, half from Arthur's clipped soldier sentences and half from what Harper didn't say. The Blackwood family held a strip of borderland called Iwara. The men were at the front. The money was gone into the war like water into sand, and this girl was being sent between relatives with her toolbox because a workshop bench was the one place the world still made sense to her. Somewhere in hour 2, she opened the box to check on her tools after a bump, and I got one glimpse of the inside. Every pair of pliers wrapped in cloth, every wire coil labeled in tiny, careful handwriting, the whole kit organized with the ferocious tidiness of a kid holding her life together with system and string. I've seen fortress walls less defended than that toolbox. So when she gave the bracelet away, gave it to a stranger, out of that box, you understand what that was. Arthur understood too. The old knight looked at the bracelet, looked at me, and gave me a single nod with about 400 pages of terms and conditions in it. I put the bracelet on, and it never came off again for the rest of this story. File it under things I'm keeping. The bracelet and the kid's future, both. Now, since I was apparently collecting things, the world decided to teach me humility, and it did it with dogs. I was scouting a magic temple on the map, and the road to it was held by direwolves. Regular direwolves I eat for breakfast, but a player had died there earlier, a solo girl who got swarmed. And here's a detail of this world most people learn too late. Monsters that kill grow. Her wolves had evolved into dire wolf gladiators, faster, meaner, coordinated, and I rode into them with launch week troops and the confidence of a 5-year veteran. The veteran got educated. They split my kiting lanes, cut the loop, and ate 2 of my archers before I could blink, and I did the thing that separates people who go far in this game from people who go home. I surrendered. Paid 600 gold, swallowed my pride whole, no chewing. Cool, very cool. Love that for me. First defeat of my second life, delivered by dogs. I want to be honest about how it actually felt, because the forums never see this part. I sat on a hill above that road for an hour afterward, watching the gladiator pack trot their perimeter, and the 20-year-old body was fine, but the 5-year veteran inside it was rattled. My entire advantage is knowing this world, and the world had just demonstrated, gently, using dogs, that it doesn't hold still while I remember it. Every player death changes the map. Every monster that wins gets stronger. My strategy guide was written about a country that updates itself daily, and if I ever again confused knowing the past with owning the future, the next tuition payment might not be 600 gold. Good lesson. Terrible teachers. I still hold a grudge against those specific dogs. I went back the next day with a plan instead of confidence, baited the gladiators into a canyon where their coordination meant nothing, and shot them into a rug. Then I walked into the magic temple to meet the old priest who kept it, and here my heart did a little drum roll, because I knew who this was. To every other player, a shabby old man selling overpriced blessings. In truth, one of the strongest humans alive. Torvin, a legendary monk, hiding in a village temple the way a retired heavyweight hides in a grocery store. I bought his 2 cheap spells for 2,000 gold, which every guide in my past life called the worst deal in the early game. Magic Eye, which lets you see hidden things, and Magic Fist, which summons a fist of pure force and hits like a delivery truck with a grudge. Worst deal in the game if you quit using them at level 10. Best deal in the game if you know, like I did, that both spells grow with you forever, and that buying them is the entry ticket to the old man's hidden quest line. The system chimed. Quest accepted. Torvin's care. The retired heavyweight had decided to keep an eye on me. The purchase itself was theater worth describing. The temple was one room, dust and incense, and a collection box with 3 copper coins in it, and the old man shuffled around behind the counter like his knees were older than the building. He quoted me 2,000 gold for the pair of spells without looking up, the price of a small house. For magic, every appraiser rates as newbie trash. And he said it in the flat voice of a man who has watched 1,000 players scoff and walk out, which was, I understood, exactly the design. The price is the filter. Only 2 kinds of people pay it, fools and believers, and the temple was fishing for the second kind. I put the gold on the counter in 1 stack. The old man's hands stopped moving for half a second, just half. And then he wrapped my 2 scrolls in cloth like they were sandwiches and told me, "Spells are like shoes, boy. Cheap ones fit better than you'd think if you walk far enough." I walked out the door and the quest chimed before my foot hit the second step. He knew. He'd known the moment the stack hit the counter, and I grinned the whole ride home, because being seen through by a demigod is alarming, but being approved of by one is a warm and specific feeling, like a bank pre-approving you for a loan you haven't asked for yet. I field-tested the new spells that same week in what my studio later called the farming spree, and what the local monster population presumably called something else. Magic Fist has a property no guide ever documented. Because no guide writer ever kept it past level 10, its damage scales with your knowledge stat. And my knowledge stat, thanks to a certain quiz garden and a lifetime of hoarded lore, was deformed for my level. So the fist that other players remembered as a starter spell arrived, from me, like a wardrobe dropped from a balcony. I cleared 3 dens in 2 days, developed hand signals for fist then volley combos with my archers, and started a tally on my saddle that Elian would later ban as unbecoming of a lord. And Magic Eye, the other half of my temple purchase, quietly changed how I saw everything. I mean that literally. Hidden seams in cliff faces, buried hinges under moss, the faint breathing glow of concealed creatures. The world is absolutely covered in secrets, is the thing. It's wallpapered in them. Most players just never buy the glasses. He wasn't the only one. On my way out of town, I got ambushed by Money, a rich girl player in designer everything, flanked by her brother, who introduced himself as Blaze, vice president of world domination, which was and would remain the biggest guild on the server. They'd seen my battle records. They wanted to buy me. Salary, guild backing, the whole package, delivered with the gentle arrogance of people who have never been told no by anything with a price tag. I showed them a cheap blessing, hid everything that mattered, played the part of a lucky newbie, and walked away with 700 gold in apology money for their pushiness. Because if a whale insists on spraying cash, the polite thing is to stand where it lands. Blaze watched me go with narrowed eyes. Remember him. He spends the rest of this story slowly figuring out that the lucky newbie is the most dangerous man on the server and paying me millions for the privilege. The next stop was a watermill, and the watermill is where this whole story quietly changes species. The mill sat on a river outside town, and it was staffed by fairies. I need you to recalibrate whatever you're picturing. Fairies in World of Heroes are not sparkly decorations. They're a whole oppressed working class, palm-sized people born from raw emotion, owned by the tower faction the way a factory owns its machines, and rented out to buildings like this one to grind out gold for masters they'll never meet. The mill fairies worked the wheel from dawn to dark and kept about none of it. Here's the scene that actually did it. I stopped at the mill to pay the standard visitor toll, and the fairy who processed my 3 coins was a guard fairy with cracked spectacles held together by wire. He counted my toll twice, logged it in a ledger with a pencil stub shorter than his hand, and then apologized to me for the delay. Apologized. For taking 4 seconds to count 3 coins, with the reflexive flinch of someone whose previous management style involved consequences. Behind him, the wheel crew was singing to keep their turning rhythm, some little work song about a village with warm bread in it, and every fairy on that wheel was wearing what I can only describe as weather damage, because the tower doesn't issue coats to rental assets. I'd seen all this in my past life and filed it under scenery. That's the confession in this story. 5 years the first time around, and I filed it under scenery. I watched them for a while. Then I did something with no strategic justification whatsoever. I gave them 1,500 gold, which at that stage of the game was most of my liquid worth, and told them to buy themselves something warm. The system, which sees everything, made a small note. Hidden quest complete, a lesser fairy's gratitude. Mill income doubled. And the fairies looked at me like I was a weather event that had never happened before in recorded history. Hold that image. It matters more than any artifact in this story. The spokesman with the cracked spectacles tried to refuse the money, by the way, held the pouch back out to me with both hands, vibrating slightly, explaining that there must be an error, that visitors pay fairies and not the reverse, that he had no authorization to process a transaction in this direction. I told him the authorization was that winter was coming, and the wheel crew had no coats. He stood there doing visible arithmetic between terror and hope won by a coin flip. And if you want to know the moment this story picked its real main quest, it wasn't a system chime. It was a small guard fairy in broken glasses, bowing so low his spectacles fell off, whispering that he would keep receipts for every copper. He did, incidentally, keep receipts. Months later, as deputy administrator of a rising city, Elion presented me with a bound ledger accounting for the original 1,500 gold, every copper's journey, robes purchased, output gained, interest accrued, and a final page calculating, in his careful hand, the current net worth of that first gift, which by his figures had compounded through wages and works into a number with enough digits to fund a small war. And at the bottom, one line in fresher ink, the only editorial comment in the entire document. It says, "Some investments cannot be repaid, only continued." I keep it in the temple archive, next to the framed homework, and I have instructed the archivists in writing that of the 2 documents, the ledger is the founding one. The Mills neighborhood came with a high-difficulty battle against apprentice fairies, the caster kind, and winning it earned me 18 little people who changed my career. Pixie architects, logistics troops. They can't fight. They can't even bluff. What they do is build, twice as fast and half as cheap, and when they appeared on my roster, the game may as well have played a title card. Because there it was, the word that would eat my whole life. Architect. But the real pivot came at the magic well, which is exactly what it sounds like, a well you fish in, except it drops into the sea of magic, the ocean of raw spell stuff that flows underneath the entire world. Fishing there is gambling with extra steps. You can pull up treasure, junk, or something with teeth. I pulled all 3. The junk phase lasted an hour and produced 2 boots, a broken lantern, and a fish that appraised as morally questionable. No other stats, just that. Then the line went heavy in the way that isn't weight, but intent, and I hauled up a tuna the size of a canoe with a system tag on it. And behind the tuna, riding its wake like a boarding party, came the fishmen. Pro-demon fishmen, tridents and grudges, boiling up out of the well ring faster than I could count. The fight went knife close. They swarmed my firing line, my archers gave ground in a shrinking spiral, and for about 90 seconds, it was genuinely coin flip whether my morale or theirs cracked first. My 3 Harpy complaints department spent those same 90 seconds performing their masterpiece, locating the fishman war leader by his louder gurgling, and slapping him in rotation with such rhythm that his command clicks came out syncopated and his formations started dancing to it instead of fighting. Theirs did, on a burst so timely it felt notarized, and I stood in the wreckage breathing hard with a warm bracelet and a canoe-sized fish and the specific gratitude of a man whose guardian angel moonlists as a casino dealer. Then I fed the tuna. This is the part no guide ever printed, because who feeds a caught fish? But I remembered one drunken NPC fisherman's tale from 4 years in the future, so I bought fish feed and fed my catch twice. The tuna glowed, burped, and turned silver blood, a quality upgrade that reclassified it from dinner to offering. The well accepted the offering. The teeth were a war party of pro-demon fishmen who nearly broke my line of archers before morale swung my way on a lucky burst. And I do mean lucky, because Smith's little bracelet was warm on my wrist the entire fight. And then the well gave me the item that decided everything after it. A drawing pen. Cretter's drawing pen, level 4 holy artifact, plus 8 to something the game calls inspiration, plus a 10% chance that anything you design becomes a hidden building. Most players would appraise that and shrug. I stood at the well holding the pen with my hands actually shaking, because I knew the name Cretter. Cretter was the legend players in my past life only ever met in ruined murals and torn diaries. The Architect. The hidden class nobody unlocked in 5 years, the class that doesn't fight the map, but rewrites it. This pen was the first piece of his scattered toolkit, and holding it, the plan I'd been circling since the character lobby finally landed and folded its wings. Everyone else in this world was going to play heroes. I was going to play the man who builds the world the heroes stand on, which meant it was time to call the company. The company is my studio, and I should introduce them because you're going to be stuck with them for the rest of this story. Chi-Chi Dream Studio, 5 people, 1 rented office that smells like instant noodles and ambition. Chen Wei, calm, precise, the best archer microplayer I know. Wang Bo, loud, shameless, dreams of leading an undead empire specifically so nobody can make him do cardio. Xiao Li, our quiet genius, the youngest, reads game systems the way other people read menus. And Sun Mei, our accountant, sweet as a peach and luckier than statistics allow. The kind of person who rolls the rarest tower blueprint on the server on her literal first try, which she then did, that same week, while the rest of us made peace with our gods. I called them all in at 1 in the morning and laid it out. The gold price had already jumped from 1.5 to 15. The game was the future, and I, their boss, who could not explain how I knew any of this, handed them each a printed guide covering their first month, hidden quests included, and asked them to trust me. They looked at the guides. They looked at me. Wang Bo said, "Boss, if this is all true, I'm naming my first bone dragon after you." And that was that. All in. I should preserve the actual meeting for posterity because it was less a briefing and more a hostage situation with snacks. Picture 1 in the morning, 5 people around a table built for 3, and me sliding printed folders across it like a conspiracy theorist with a laminator. Chen Wei read his cover page, which said Rampart Faction, Archer Route, Hidden Quest on Day 2, and asked exactly one question, which was, "What's your source?" I said, "Trust me." He looked at me for 5 full seconds, the longest audit of my life, then shrugged and started taking notes, because Chen Wei decided years ago that I'm either always right or an alien, and both are investable. Xiao Li speed-read his entire folder in 4 minutes and went very quiet, and then said, softly, "Boss, if half of this is real, the gold price math means we're rich by autumn." I said the gold price math is the conservative part, and watched a 17-year-old genius experience vertigo while sitting down. The guides paid off on schedule, and watching my people cash them was its own serial drama. Chen Wei hit his Rampart hidden quest on Day 2 to the hour, mailed me a screenshot of the reward with the caption "Always right or an alien, still investable." Wang Bo seized his first graveyard on Day 4 and immediately renamed it Corporate Headquarters, and his skeleton workforce, per the necromancy interface, is technically listed as staff, which he cites in every argument about whose faction has better culture. Xiao Li infiltrated Tower Guild politics so smoothly that within 2 weeks, a mage syndicate tried to recruit him as an analyst, unaware they were his homework, and Sun Mei followed her folder exactly, except where her luck overrode it, which was constantly, "The child cannot open a standard chest. They upgrade themselves out of embarrassment when she touches them." Sunmei asked if there would be cute mounts. I said yes. She was in before the folder. Due diligence takes many forms. With the company deployed, I ran a small experiment in marketing. I posted my tree spirit bow on the forum anonymously, tagged as a lucky newbie drop, and watched the server lose its mind. World Domination's leadership pinged the post within the hour. Salary offers hit 200,000. The gold exchange rate, incidentally, crossed 6 to 1 that same week, quadrupled from launch, exactly on the curve I'd drawn for the studio. And Sunmei, who as accountant had been maintaining a small, tasteful spreadsheet of my predictions titled Boss Prophecy Tracker, added the data point, closed her laptop, and announced to the office that she would no longer be double-checking my numbers, only my grocery lists, which continue, she notes, to be flawed. I read every comment with deep satisfaction, took a screenshot for my collection, and deleted the whole thread without replying, which on a forum is the equivalent of lighting a cigar with someone's business card. Petty? Absolutely. But information is the only currency I hoard, and I wanted the big guilds trained early to chase my shadow instead of my face. Speaking of shadows, at dawn a squad of them tried to kill me in my own camp. Wood Elf Raiders, led by 10 myriad sword dancers, which are teleporting twin-blade assassins with a speed stat that reads like a typo. High difficulty siege on my home turf against units specifically built to delete archers. I won it on eyesight, cheap tricks, and terrain, funneling their teleports into kill boxes until the last dancer ran out of places to be, and the reward menu offered me a choice of prizes. I took 4 myriad sword dancers for my own roster. If something is good at murdering me, my policy is to put it on payroll. The siege itself, though, roll the footage. Teleporting assassins against archers is the worst matchup in the manual, because the whole archer game is distance, and a myriad sword dancer's whole game is deleting distance. Their opening move put 2 dancers inside my formation before my sentries finished inhaling to shout. What saved the morning was paranoia I'd installed in advance. My camp torches were arranged to leave no true dark pockets. And a teleporter needs a landing spot she can see, which means light placement is anti-assassin architecture, which means I'd been fortifying against this exact unit since the day I pitched the first tent. Every blink they made arrived somewhere lit, somewhere watched, somewhere pre-sighted by a crossfire lane. And I spent the fight conducting rather than aiming, calling lanes by number, while the dancers grew visibly frustrated at a battlefield with no shadows in it. The last one stood in the middle of my camp, twin blades out, surrounded, and did the little helpless half-turn of a performer whose stage has been repossessed. I offered contract terms instead of a volley. She looked at the torches one more time, sheathed both blades, and to this day I maintain that's the sincerest job application I've ever received. The test run afterward was pure joy. I lined up targets and watched my 4 new employees relay kill across the field, blink/blink, each one arriving exactly where the previous one's momentum ended, a conveyor belt made of knives. Sunmei watched with her hands on her cheeks and asked if we could get 10 more. Working on it, I said, and I was. The policy expanded fast. A great werewolf boss with a hidden twin form tried me next and got probed, dissected, and recruited into the trophy cabinet, and the probing is the story there. The great werewolf fights in 2 shapes, a hulking brute form and a lean, fast form, and it swaps between them on hidden triggers. And everything I remembered from past life guides said brute form was the dangerous one. Wrong, as it turned out, or rather, outdated, because this particular wolf had eaten somebody since the guides were written. I spent the first third of the fight feeding it cheap probing volleys from different angles like a doctor tapping a knee, cataloging which stimulus triggered which shape, and once I had the reflex chart, the fight was over in principle. Show it archers at range, it goes lean and charges. Lean form has paper defense. Volley, swap, repeat. The wolf spent its last minutes being operated by its own reflexes like a vending machine, and my centaurs, who have generational opinions about wolves, asked permission to keep 1 fang each, which I granted, because a company should have traditions. And its reward draw spat out a blueprint that made me sit down on a rock. Dream Fairy Garden. A hidden building that houses a race I'd only ever read about. Dream Fairies. Tier 1 troops with 6 abilities, a luck aura, and a direct line to the goddess of luck herself. My pixie architects built it in a day, and out of the garden came little glowing people who blessed my dice just by existing, and my camp began to change. It wasn't a mud pit with a campfire anymore, You don't install a luck aura, it turns out, you meet one. The garden finished at dusk, and at full dark it lit up from inside like a lantern made of plants, and they came out of the flowers the way ideas come out of a good night's sleep, small, glowing people trailing sparks that made you feel, irrationally and immediately, that today had gone better than you'd realized, and tomorrow was already leaning your way. One of them landed on my archer captain's nose. The captain, a scarred centaur veteran with a face like a cliff, went absolutely still and stood there cross-eyed for 10 minutes so as not to disturb it. And that, more than any aura stat, told me what I'd just planted. Over the following days, the dream fairies revealed their full portfolio, and it read like a benefits package from Heaven's HR. They tend dreams, actual sleeping dreams, and my camp's rest quality climbed until the system awarded a fatigue recovery bonus to my whole territory. They condense dreamstones, little crystallized wishes that appraise as high-grade crafting cores. And once, when one of my younger fairies had night terrors about the tower, 3 dream fairies sat on his tent all night in a triangle, glowing softly. And whatever they did in there, the kid came out at dawn rested and humming, and the terrors never came back. I checked the market prices for what dream fairy services would cost, if you could hire them, which you cannot. Then I looked at my garden of them, living rent-free on my land because I'd once bet a prize wheel on a mushroom, and I went and personally watered the garden, and I have watered it personally ever since. Some assets you maintain, some you thank. It had a mill sending money, a garden growing luck, a soup kitchen on the way, a population of tiny workers who had opinions about roof angles. Somewhere in there, 2 players from a guild called Subduing Dragon decided the mill looked undefended and attacked it while I was out. My myriad sword dancers were home. The 2 of them were not undefended so much as pre-buried. Their guild ran to the forum crying cheater. The officials pulled the logs, cleared me publicly, doubled my compensation, and forced the accusers to rename their accounts to Liu Chuan is awesome as an apology, which is the single greatest punishment any judicial system has ever devised. The details of the incident are worth savoring slowly, like dessert. The 2 Subduing Dragon players had done reconnaissance, by which I mean they'd looked at the mill, seen fairies, and concluded profits. They announced themselves by kicking over a fairy's lunch pail, which is the detail I want preserved because the system logs everything, and the logs later went public. What the logs show next is 4 myriad sword dancers arriving via teleport in a pattern the forum analysts described as unnecessarily artistic. What the logs show after that is 30 seconds long and censored for tone. Their guild's expose thread was titled Cheater Ruins the Game, and it lasted 6 hours, which was how long the officials needed to pull the logs, watch the lunch pail moment, and post the full footage with timestamps. The thread then performed the fastest genre shift in forum history, from courtroom drama to comedy, and the renamed accounts were the officials' idea, not mine, which is my favorite part. Somewhere in the compensation mail was a note of apology so stiff and formal that I framed it. The mill fairies repaired the lunch pail, held a small ceremony for it, and named it the Pail. They named the Pail. We are not a normal organization, and I have stopped apologizing for it. The mill, meanwhile, had begun upgrading itself, which I need to explain because I didn't order any of it. The fairies, flush with doubled income, had visited a merchant ferry caravan and bought robes. Proper insulated worker robes, their first cold weather gear in living memory, and something about a fairy in a warm robe works harder out of sheer astonishment, because output climbed again on its own. Then the guard fairy with the cracked spectacles came to me with a formal proposal, written out, with margins, requesting a loan against future wages to fund his advancement training so he could, quote, better protect the assets, unquote. And I read this tiny masterpiece of bureaucratic courage, and I did not issue a loan. I issued a grant, effective immediately, and a title. And the quest chain that bloomed off that decision would eventually change both our lives. But that morning, it was just a small person in fixed spectacles bowing until his forehead touched my boot. And me learning that you can't actually order a fairy to stop bowing, you can only outlast him. That was the week the server learned my name, Liu Chuan, the lucky newbie with the weird troops and the muddy little camp that kept sprouting buildings nobody could identify. They had no idea. The mud pit had a pen, a plan, and a landlord with 5 years of tomorrow in his head. The forum threads from that week are museum pieces now, and my favorites, which I have saved, include a 200-reply argument titled, "What faction is he even in?" which concluded, wrongly, that I was a hidden castle subfaction, a thread by a self-declared insider explaining that Liu Chuan was actually a developer test account, which collected 9,000 upvotes and a moderator warning. and one quiet post by a player who'd walked past my territory at night and simply described it: the lit lamps, the fairy song, the centaurs on the wall, and titled it, "I don't know what this place is, but I slowed down when I rode past." That last one I didn't screenshot. I printed it. And the landlord had just heard a rumor about a caravan that traveled only at night, run by a fairy merchant who was spending his own life to feed 2,000 of his people. Time to meet the best soul on this continent. Before the caravan, though, the neighborhood had one more exam for me, and it was the nastiest fight of the early game. A fairy ring event spawned a war party of 3-headed hounds, and behind them, their boss, a giant 3-headed inferno, Tier 5. A dog the size of a barn with 3 heads that disagree about which part of you to eat first, and a habit of painting the battlefield with walls of fire. Tier 5 against my Tier 1 archers is not a difficulty spike. It's a difficulty cliff with a sign on it that says, "Come back next season." The arena was a bowl of scorched meadow, with the fairy ring glowing at the center, and the inferno announced the rules on turn 1 by exhaling a wall of flame across the middle of the field, cutting my kiting room in half. That's the boss's whole doctrine. Shrink the map until the archers have nowhere to skate, then let the hounds do the chewing. Every guide from my past life said the same thing about this fight, which was, don't take this fight. But I'd noticed something the guides hadn't, because guide writers watched the boss and I watched the floor. The firewalls persisted. They didn't expire when the boss placed new ones. They accumulated, and the hound's pathing treated them as obstacles to route around, but only when calm. A hound in full chase doesn't route. A hound in full chase runs through hell itself to reach the thing that's running. I didn't have a next season, so I used the fire. The Inferno's own firewalls don't distinguish friend from dog, and hounds chase what runs, so I ran, deliberately, threading my archers through the gaps while the pursuing hounds funneled straight through their boss's flames like meat through a toaster. It nearly broke anyway. My morale dipped to the floor, one bad roll from a rout, and the bracelet on my wrist got warm, and the roll came up mine. We held. The Inferno died, confused, medium rare, and the reward screen offered 3 special options and 4,500 gold, though I skipped the part where I nearly died, so here it is. Mid-fight, the boss adapted. It stopped painting walls across my escape lanes and started painting them in rings, closing a noose of fire with me and half my archers inside. And the hounds on the outside stopped chasing and started waiting, which is the single most frightening thing I've ever seen a dog do. Smoke everywhere, my morale bar sliding toward the cliff edge, one bad roll from a rout that would end inside a burning circle. I did the only thing left, which was to charge the wall itself. Pick the segment nearest the boss, eat the burn across my whole squad, and burst through into the one place the hounds weren't stationed, directly under the Inferno's chins. All 3 of them. Chins. The heads had a committee meeting about which of them got to bite me, and committee meetings take time, and my archers used that time to introduce all 3 chins to a unified volley policy. The bracelet burned warm. The morale roll came up mine by a coin's width, and the noose broke from the inside, and among the true treasures I dug out a pair of worn leather work gloves. Predator's leather gloves, component 2. And with 2 components in hand, the set finally showed me its full name, and I had to sit down again. The Order Hammer. A unique combination artifact, one of a handful in the entire world, 5 pieces scattered across the map. And a warm little note in the lore text mentioning that historically, holders of separate components regard each other as mortal enemies. Wonderful. I now owned 2/5 of a priceless hammer and a subscription to assassination attempts. I put the gloves on. They fit like they'd been waiting. And one night, soon after, checking the set's lore page before sleep, I noticed the detail that would sit in my spine for the rest of the season. The page tracks components as claimed or unclaimed, dimly, like distant lighthouses. 2 glowed mine, 2 sat dark and dormant, but the 5th, the hammer's head itself, the page marked with a word I hadn't seen on any artifact screen before, and the word was moving. The fairy ring itself turned out to be a maze with a resident, an ice fairy named Yuki, who was supposed to deliver a mystical riddle and could not remember her lines. She started over 4 times, got angry at herself, iced her own feet to the floor, and finally just showed me the crystal ball, which held coordinates to the next creature component, a measuring ruler. I bribed her with honey, looted 206 mushrooms out of her maze while she wasn't looking, and left a 5-star review. Let me preserve the riddle attempts for science. Attempt 1, Yuki flew up with tremendous ceremony, announced, "Traveler, answer me this," and then stared into the middle distance for 11 seconds and said, "Hold on." Attempt 2 got as far as what walks on 4 legs before she visibly lost the thread and improvised. What walks on 4 legs and is your favorite? Which is not a riddle, that's a survey. Attempt 3 she wrote on her own arm and then couldn't read her handwriting. Attempt 4 she got angry at the concept of riddles as a genre, declared the whole thing stupid, iced her own feet to the floor in frustration, and had to be chipped loose while shouting that this changed nothing and she was still the strongest. Then she just showed me the crystal ball, the sacred mystery she was guarding, turned it around like a shopkeeper showing a fish tank, and said, "Is this what you wanted? Take a look. Don't tell the others I skipped the riddle." Strongest fairy on the continent, according to one source, who is her. Remember Yuki, too. The dumbest fairy on the continent, and one of the most important, but that's a later story. And then, that night, the caravan came. I heard it before I saw it. Wheels on the dark road, no lanterns, because this caravan didn't want to be seen. Smuggled war machines under the tarps. And walking beside the lead wagon, a fairy the size of my forearm, with a merchant's ledger bigger than he was, doing sums by moonlight. Shenze, boss of the Hope Caravan. I bought a supply cart from him, and a backpack, and arrows, and while we haggled, his Christmas fairies told me about their boss in the way employees only talk about a boss they'd die for. Shenze had earned enough over the years to buy his own advancement 10 times over, the promotion every fairy dreams of, the one that grants a longer life. He never bought it. Every coin went to food. 2,000 fairies in slums across the tower's territory ate because this one small person kept choosing them over himself, year after year. And now the ledger was almost balanced in the worst way. The system put it plainly when I looked at him with magic eye, remaining lifespan measured in weeks. The haggling, before I knew any of that, had been the most pleasant commerce of my life. Shenze haggled like a duelist, all courtesy and footwork, quoting me 3 prices for the supply cart, the fair one, the friend one, and the one for people who let his fairies warm their hands at their campfire, which I had without thinking an hour earlier, and which he had noticed because he notices everything. We settled on the 3rd price. Then he threw in the arrows at cost. Then he threw in advice about the North Road for free, and I slowly realized I was being out-generoused by a professional, and there was nothing I could do about it. His Christmas fairies orbited the whole transaction, wearing little red hats, logging inventory in squeaky voices, and one of them fell asleep mid-count in an open crate of bowstrings and was left there, tucked in, workflow adjusted around him, like this happens nightly, because it does. He caught me looking and laughed it off and gave me a discount. I went back to my tent that night and sat there for a long time. Then I opened my quest log because the system had heard something in me shift, and there they were. 2 new entries. The first said, Shenze's advancement, 46 days. The second one had a border I'd never seen on a quest in 5 years of playing, a border the color of a silver dawn, and it said, in very simple words, Liberation of the Fairy Clan. Objective, destroy the Tower faction. A true God-tier quest. The system asking one launch week player in a muddy camp whether he'd like to declare war on the strongest faction in the world, on the titan who runs it, on the entire mage aristocracy and their factories full of small, drowning workers. I looked at the accept button for about as long as it takes to remember a fairy handing me a discount with 3 weeks left to live. Yeah, put it on my tab. Before the caravan rolled on that night, Shenze did one more thing. He came around the wagon with a blueprint tube nearly his own height, laid it across both arms like a ceremonial sword, and presented me with a demon-slaying ballista design, military contraband of the serious kind, the kind his night-only travel schedule existed to move. For your camp, he said, a place with this many lamps lit at night will attract things. And I asked what I owed. He looked genuinely puzzled by the question, the way you'd be puzzled if a guest asked what he owed for the salt. That's the merchant the tower had priced at nothing. That's the man the ledger said had weeks. I stood in the road watching his lanternless wagons fade into the dark, listening to the little bells they wear so the fairies walking behind don't lose the column. And I made the quiet kind of vow you don't say out loud because saying it out loud would make it about you. He was right about the lamps, incidentally. 2 nights later, 60 iron golems walked out of the dark toward my camp in perfect rows. Tier 3 constructs with tower shields for faces, immune to fear, immune to reason, immune to most of what I own. Arrows bounce off iron golems the way complaints bounce off a landlord. What doesn't bounce is arithmetic. Golems are slow, golems don't heal, and the supply cart I'd bought from a certain fairy merchant carries enough ammunition for 53 full volleys, a number I know exactly because I counted every one of them that night, kiting 60 walking anvils in a circle around my own walls until they were 60 piles of scrap iron and dawn was coming up over a camp that never lost a tent. I mailed Shenze a thank you note. He mailed back a bill for 0 and a sketch of a golem with a sad face. The studio group chat that week was its own sitcom. Chen Wei posted his rampart progress in tidy bullet points. Wang Bo posted a manifesto titled My Undead Empire Phase 1, which was mostly a drawing. Xiao Li posted Tower Guild politics analysis that read like an intelligence briefing. And Sun Mei posted a trap chest she'd found that turned out to be full of live hamsters, 40 of them, which the system classified as a reward, and honestly, based on her luck stat, it probably was. The first soldiers of that war signed up within days, and they signed up in the most fairy way imaginable. My gift to the watermill fairies had grown interest. They'd bought robes, they'd doubled output, they'd elected a spokesman, a bespectacled guard fairy named Elian with the soul of an accountant and the anxiety of a man who has read history. And when their rental contract lapsed, all 100 of them marched to my refugee camp in a column, luggage on their backs, and formally requested to become my subjects. The system stamped it. Fairy Waterwheel Blueprint acquired. Elian appointed territory administrator, and a hero promotion quest sprouted over his little head like a green shoot, because apparently even the game agreed he was management material. The quest's fine print sent us both quiet, though. Elian's path to becoming a true hero, the system said, ran through 4 tower cities, 4 specific archives holding 4 pieces of his own history that he'd never told me, and, I gradually understood, couldn't, because whatever had happened to Elian before the mill, his memory held it the way you hold a hot pan, briefly, and with a cloth. He read the quest text twice, polished his spectacles, and asked, in his careful voice, whether I would require him to pursue it. Require. I told him the territory required exactly one thing of him, which was that he keep being Elian, and the rest was his to open or leave shut on his own clock. He nodded, and filed the quest, and I watched him not pursue it for a long time, and I never pushed. Doors like that are his architecture, not mine. My camp had citizens now. It also had a landlady I hadn't hired. I found her in the Dream Fairy Garden, a fairy who hadn't been there yesterday, tending mushrooms with the serene entitlement of someone who owns the place. Her name was Celestine. My appraisal skills slid off her like rain off glass, and when I pushed the magic eye harder, the game showed me a wall of question marks and one legible line. Tier 9, mythical. For scale, Tier 5 was the giant dog that almost ended me. Tier 9 does not appear on player screens. Tier 9 is the category where the game files things like Dragons of Legend and the personal staff of gods. And this one was squatting in my garden, eating my mushrooms, and when she noticed me gawking, she looked up and said, with her mouth full, that her lady the goddess of luck had taken an interest in me, and that I should remember one thing. Every gift has a price tag. Then she went back to the mushrooms. I stood very still, like a man who has just learned his garden gnome is a nuclear power, and quietly updated my mental org chart. Boss, me, regional manager, possibly the goddess of luck, site inspector, Celestine, payable in mushrooms. I did try once, early, to establish the actual chain of command. I explained to her courteously that this was my territory, my garden, and my mushroom crop, and that residency traditionally involved some formality, perhaps an application. Celestine listened with the patient expression of a cat being read a lease, waited for me to finish, and then held up one of my mushrooms and pointed at the spot where she'd been sitting, where I now noticed the mushrooms grew in a spiral pattern found nowhere else in nature, twice the size of the rest of the crop and faintly luminous. Her sitting there was improving them. Her existence was fertilizer for miracles. She raised one tiny eyebrow, and I heard myself say, "Welcome to the team. The west bed gets morning sun," and that was the last time management attempted to manage. The soup kitchen finished construction that week, and my humble refugee camp revealed its next secret, because with a kitchen attached, the camp started offering Tier 3 and Tier 4 troops for recruitment. A refugee camp, outproducing the starter barracks of actual factions. I looked at my mud pit with tears in my eyes. They grow up so fast. The kitchen's opening day earned itself a plate in my memory. My farmers, the 50 from the countryside, cooked, my fairies served, and the first guests were a limping mercenary band that had been eyeing my camp from the ridge for 2 days, deciding, I'd assumed, whether to rob us. They came down at the smell of it. They ate 3 helpings each in a silence that got less armed by the spoonful. And their captain, a scarred human with a stronghold accent, finally asked what we charged. Elian, gloriously, quoted him the fairy rate, which is nothing plus you carry your bowl back. The band enlisted the following morning. All of them. Cooking, it turns out, is siegecraft aimed inward, and my kitchen would go on to conquer more recruits than my archers ever did. I should also log what the ballista was doing during that dinner, because Shenze's contraband blueprint had come off the drawing board that same week, and the demon-slaying ballista now stood on my camp's north platform with its arms folded, so to speak, the largest object my little territory owned. The mercenaries had definitely clocked it on their way down the ridge. I've always suspected the kitchen closed the deal that the ballista opened, which is, when I think about it, my entire foreign policy in one sentence. Soup in front, siege engine behind. Everyone eats. The coordinates from Yuki's crystal ball pointed deep into the wilds, so I packed the archers and went ruler hunting. The trek was a highlight reel of this game's sense of humor. A griffin fight that paid out in map vision. An evil eye lord, a floating boss that commands lesser eyes with beam attacks, which I beat by arranging my own troops so the boss's giant beams kept passing through its own front line on the way to me. Friendly fire isn't an accident if you schedule it. The grateful countryside coughed up 50 farmers as a reward. Actual farmer troops, which sounds like a joke prize until you remember farmers make food and food feeds fairies. I signed them all. The farmers came with a village elder who insisted on a signing ceremony, which consisted of me placing my hand on a plow while he recited the responsibilities of a lord at length. And the responsibilities turned out to be a genuinely beautiful old text about rivers and roofs and never eating first in a famine. And I'd come to this field to loot a chest. I left it having accidentally sworn something ancient with witnesses. The system logged it. Of course it logged it. This world logs everything you swear with your hand on a tool, which is worth knowing before you lean on things casually. The ruler itself sat inside a puzzle chest that rejected me 50 times in a row. 50. I know because Celestine appeared on a nearby rock around attempt 20, just to watch, eating a mushroom with the slow rhythm of someone at the theater. On attempt 51, the chest opened, and Creter's measuring ruler was mine. Component 3. The pen designs, the ruler perfects. Somewhere in the afterlife, a dead architect was watching his toolkit come back together and, I hoped, approving of the new management. That was the exact moment the sky went red. Red border, full screen, the alert the game reserves for one thing. An NPC I knew was about to die permanently, and the timer said 4 hours, and the name on the quest said Harper. The little treasure maker, the girl with the toolbox. Her family's territory, Iwara, was a war-chewed strip of land out west, and the quest text laid it out in surgical bullet points. Village raided, goblins hunting survivors. And the reason my blood actually went cold, one line of status flavor the system did not have to include. Target has stopped running. 4 hours of game time, and I was half a continent away. So I did the thing that made this rescue famous on the forums later. I logged out. Stood in my apartment in my underwear at 3 in the morning, calling every contact I had for intel about West Map terrain, because the clock only runs in-game, and offline planning is free. Then I logged back in, gambled my only return scroll on a partial distance trick that every guide said was wasted usage, and the trick deserves its 2 sentences because it saved the timeline. Return scrolls teleport you to your bound point, useless for going somewhere new, unless you know that the scroll calculates route, not destination, and can be interrupted mid-cast by crossing a region boundary, dumping you at the nearest sanctified site instead, which no guide ever printed because interrupting a teleport is famous for relocating your limbs separately. I did the math on a dead sprint, cast while jumping a border cairn, and arrived at Glory City's temple steps in one piece with my boots on the wrong feet, which the system logged as a minor miracle, and I logged as a Tuesday. Landed in Glory City, sweet-talked a stablekeeper into lending me a royal griffin with no saddle, and flew west, holding on to its feathers with my bare hands, like a man abducting himself. The borrowing itself was a negotiation conducted at a dead sprint. Glory City's griffin stables don't rent to unranked strangers. So I arrived at the stablemaster's counter with, in order, a lie about a courier commission, my entire remaining gold as deposit, and, when both of those bounced off his crossed arms, the truth. A child on a cliff at the end of a 4-hour timer, said fast and flat with the timer visible in my eyes. He looked at me for 2 seconds. Then he pointed at the biggest griffin in the yard and said, "That one hates saddles and loves emergencies. Bring her back fed." And that is how I learned that the fastest paperwork in any city is a stablemaster who was once, himself, too late for something. I brought her back fed. I still visit her. Her name is Ember, and she has never once let me forget I owe her. I found the goblins first. They were tracking a trail of small footprints toward a ravine, and their boss, one of Hell's little officer creatures called a marg, was making the kind of noise a predator makes when the chase is nearly over. I came down out of the dark on a stolen griffin, said no introduction whatsoever, and put a magic fist through the marg from above. One punch. The delivery truck with a grudge, as advertised. My archers, unloaded from the poor griffin's back like clowns from a car, handled the rest of the pack before the echo finished. Harper was at the bottom of the ravine, at the edge of the drop, not hiding anymore. 15 years old, filthy, dry-eyed in the way that's much worse than crying, standing very close to a fall she had stopped being afraid of. Around her, this is what the war had left. A village of children and old women. A best friend named Daisy, who was the only person she'd smiled at in a year. A mother, Alara, gone gray at 30-something and hollowed out by waiting for a husband on a front line that ate men and letters alike. I sat down on a rock a polite distance away, didn't say anything wise, and started unpacking food. You want to know what fixes a moment like that? Not speeches. Rations. Her friend Daisy found us first, actually, a village girl with a slingshot she absolutely intended to use on me until Harper said my name. That slingshot detail matters because it was the village's whole defensive doctrine. I did a walkthrough that evening, and Iwara's garrison consisted of one elderly knight, 4 boys drilling with rakes, and a militia roster where half the entries had the word "gone" written after them in Alara's careful hand. Gone to the front, gone last winter, just gone. That ledger radicalized me more than any battle in this story. Wars get recapped as heroes and villains, and then you stand in a cold kitchen reading a mother's handwriting doing casualty accounting with the word "gone" because the other words cost too much. You understand what you're actually here to interrupt. Hot ones, and enough of them, and someone doing the annoying arithmetic of feeding a village out loud so a 15-year-old doesn't have to keep doing it in her head alone. I stayed 3 days. I healed the sick with temple scrolls, and then I fixed the food problem in a way only a shameless forum veteran could. I set Harper up with a market stall and spread the word that a mysterious young craftswoman in Iwara was buying grain at double price, and I let player greed do the logistics. They came in caravans. World Domination even staged a charity delivery for the publicity, which I graciously allowed because their PR budget was feeding my village. 32,000 rations in a week. The stall itself became a phenomenon I hadn't fully planned. Harper, it turns out, is incapable of running a dishonest business even as a front, so when players delivered grain, she started fixing their gear while they waited. Small repairs, a re-wrapped hilt, a strap re-sewn with treasure maker hands. And word got out that the mysterious grain girl's repairs came back better than new, slightly but measurably better. The queue stopped being about grain at all. By day 5, there were players lining up with deliberately broken equipment. By day 6, World Domination's delivery caravan included 3 officers whose actual mission, I learned later, was to scout whether the grain girl was a hidden legend worth signing. She served them soup and fixed a buckle, and they left a 5-star review and a retainer offer, which her mother framed without understanding, and which I intercepted and filed under "over my cold dead body." Somewhere in there, Harper started talking again. Somewhere in there, she showed me her workbench and the little silver wonders she made out of wire and scrap, and the system quietly ticked her trust in me up to its maximum. The word the interface used was family. I'm keeping that word too. Let the record show, before her whole storyline goes to war, that this is the deal I made with myself in that ravine. The Blackwood family's history says everyone she loves dies this year. I have read that history. I intend to leave corrections in the margins so heavy the book breaks. Her grandfather was already on the front line. Her father was with him. 2 months, in my past life's timeline, before the Western Front turned into a grave. I set my personal deadline right there, standing in her mother's kitchen. Level 40 before the front collapses. Absurd pace. Nobody on the server was projected to hit 40 in 2 months. The road home from that visit gave me one more fight worth keeping, an ogre warband with something the bestiaries claimed doesn't exist. Ogre casters, robed ones, hurling boulders with their minds instead of their arms, which converts the slowest melee race in the game into artillery. First volley of rocks nearly ended my supply cart and my composure together. The fix was rude and effective. Harpy hags on the casters, stealing speed, but more importantly, breaking concentration, because it turns out you cannot maintain telekinetic focus while a screeching woman with wings slaps you on a schedule. The bestiaries got an update that night, filed from my camp, and the forum's monster scholars had a small civil war about my screenshots, and I sold the battle footage to 3 guilds separately because grief should be productive. Nobody on the server had my cheat sheet. I flew home and started spending it. First purchase, a teacher. In Silver Snow City, one of the Tower's great cities, lived a retired master architect named Kalen, the only living man with the class I was chasing, famous for 2 things, his genius and his refusal to take students. Every noble in the north had tried gold, land, and daughters. I did my research instead, and my research said the great Kalen was, deep in his scholarly heart, a collector of a very specific kind of art. Fairy maidens, illustrated, tastefully, rare printings. I commissioned artists back in reality for 200,000 and had a folio printed that does not exist in any catalog, and I walked into his estate and put it on his desk next to a hand-carved figurine of a dream fairy. The old man looked at the folio, looked at me, looked at the folio, and this titan of architecture, this legend who had thrown dukes out of his parlor, cleared his throat and said, "Class starts tomorrow. Bring your own pen." I should describe the negotiation in full because I'm proud of it and ashamed of it in equal measure, which is my favorite emotional price point. Getting the appointment took 3 days of gate-level diplomacy, by which I mean bribing his housekeeper with pastries. Getting past the front parlor took the figurine, hand-carved, which bought me exactly 90 seconds of his attention, during which he informed me that he had refused 2 dukes and a princess this decade, and that my 90 seconds were nearly up. So I laid the folio on the desk, closed, spine toward him, title visible, and said nothing at all, because with a true collector the worst thing you can do is talk. The silence lasted a geological era. His eyes went to the spine. Went away, went back. One hand drifted across the desk with the elaborate casualness of a man not doing the thing he was visibly doing, and he opened the cover, and turned 1 page, and closed it, and looked out the window at his garden for a long moment. And when he turned back, his face wore the stern mask of a master architect, and his ears wore the color of a boiled crab. The exact words were, "This is a serious institution, young man, and tuition is non-refundable." And both of those statements were load-bearing lies, and we understood each other completely. I brought creditors. When he saw it, his hands shook so hard he had to sit down, and that was the day Kalen stopped being a teacher I'd tricked and started being a believer. He taught me basic architecture, then design. Then he stood me in front of the class trial that no student of his had ever passed, the entrance exam of the hidden class itself. And his voice went quiet and serious for the first time. "The trial is called The Echoes of History," he said. "You don't take an exam, boy. You get taken." He said it in his workshop, dusk coming through the high windows, and around us on every shelf stood his life's models, temples and bridges and halls in miniature. And as he spoke, he touched one, an old habit, a little worn bridge whose railing his thumb had polished bare over decades. I understood suddenly that my teacher had taken this trial once, long ago, and met whatever he'd met in there, and come out carrying it, and had never once told anyone what his echo had shown him. Some syllabus, this class of ours. The tuition is folios and figurines. The final exam is the dead. The dead build this world, and they will decide if you're worthy to hold a pen over it. Whatever you see in there, whoever you are in there, respect it. Then the world folded up like paper, and I woke, and I want to be very precise about what happens next, because it's the strangest thing this game ever did to me. I woke up in the past, not watching it, in someone else's body, someone else's life, a member of a forest centaur tribe in an age before any of the 9 factions existed. The echo had cast me as a witness to the tribe's true history, the Great Migration, the Chaos Invasion that drove them from their river, and the werewolf betrayal that broke them, the original wound behind my own centaur archer's burning hatred of wolves. I lived it in fast forward, and then the echo rewound and handed me the controls. Replay history, do better. The tribe's true spirits are watching. So let me tell it properly, because it earned that. The tribe I woke into was called the Forest Centaurs of the Loon, and the life I woke into came with a name, Ruo Mu, and a social position, and the social position was wife. Wife of Lar Karma, the tribe's greatest warrior, a slab of muscle and gentleness who greeted my arrival each morning with devoted enthusiasm. And yes, the echo had cast a 20-year-old man as a married mare. And no, the echo did not care about my feedback. I checked. There's no button. The history I had to outplay went like this. In the true past, the Chaos Wave hit the river villages first, and the tribe fled east. And their old allies, the werewolf tribe, sold their migration route to the enemy for safe passage. The column was ambushed at the fords, and Larkarma's entire family line ended there, except for one survivor, whose descendants still wake up angry. My centaur archer's wolf hatred is not a stat, it's an inheritance. I told my archers the truth of what I'd seen in the Echo, by the way, when I returned, gathered the whole squad and gave them their own history back, the river, the fords, the names. And my cliff-faced captain listened without moving, and at the end, he asked one question. Did the tribe cross the water in your version? I said, all of them, every foal. And this man who has taken arrows without blinking turned and faced the river for a while. Then he ordered the whole line to loose one volley over the water, the courtesy volley, the warning shot, aimed at nothing, at history itself, and I have never asked him to explain it, and I never will. Round 2, with me holding the reins of history, went differently at every joint. When the first chaos wave massed across the river, it found the water already burning, because I'd spent 3 days floating oil-soaked timber into the reed beds, and the wave broke against a shoreline that fought back. When the migration order came, the tribe was already packed because a certain respected wife had been running preparedness drills disguised as festivals for a month. Full confession here, since it's the proudest scam of my centaur period. You cannot tell a proud warrior tribe to rehearse fleeing, the word alone starts duels. But you can invent a festival, and I invented 3. The Feast of Swift Rivers, which was evacuation drills with garlands, a pack-carrying contest with prizes, which taught every household to have their essentials bundled in a count of 50, and a night race to the eastern fords, which was the migration route, run for glory until every foal could do it half asleep, because one day they would have to. By the time the real order came, the tribe executed the fastest migration in its history and was mildly annoyed there were no prizes at the end. Tradition, I've since concluded, is just emergency planning that learned to dance, and the werewolf tribe never got to sell anyone. Because on the night their envoys slipped out toward the enemy camp, the tribe's warriors were already positioned around the werewolf village with torches, led there by a wife who could not adequately explain her intelligence sources and had stopped trying. Larkarma raised his axe at the treaty stone and asked me, with complete trust, if this was truly necessary. I said, history says it is. He didn't ask, whose history? Good man. Terrible questions asked none. I ran that tribe for a compressed generation, grew it from hundreds to 5,000. Watched foals I'd named grow into archers whose stances I recognized because they were the ancestors of soldiers currently on my payroll in another century. And when the Echo finally released me, the hardest part wasn't the exam, it was the last morning. Larkarma at the river, helping our actual grandchildren catch fish, waving at me with his whole arm the way he always did, not knowing his wife was a ghost from the far future who'd rewritten his family out of a massacre and into a dynasty. The Echo faded him out mid-wave, so I did what I do. I met the first chaos wave at the river with fire on the water. I moved the tribe before the werewolf tribe could sell them out, and then I visited the werewolves first, at night. With policy. I grew 5,000 centaurs across a compressed generation and lost none of the named ones, 0. And when the Echo finally let go of me, the ancient dead of that tribe paid out like a grateful nation, a stack of centaur buildings, a wonder-class blueprint for a river forest, and one line of system text I'd been chasing since the fishing well. Class acquired, architect. There it was, the class nobody found in 5 years. I stood in Kalen's courtyard back in the present, and the old man read my status pane over my shoulder. The mansion was very quiet while a legendary master processed the fact that his newest student, 3 weeks into the game, was now the second living member of his class, and the first one with Creeder's own pen in his hand. Also, small footnote for the historians, in the Echo, the body I'd been cast into was a white mare, the wife of the tribe's greatest warrior, who was affectionate. I have no further statement at this time. My lawyer is a mushroom, and we will never speak of it again. Let me show you what an architect actually does, because the class description undersells it the way a match undersells a forest fire. An architect builds in combat. Mid-battle, on cooldown, I can slam structures onto the field. An archer tower where no tower should be. A trap pit under a charging boss. A a factory that produces small, self-destructing dolls, which is exactly as unhinged as it sounds and twice as effective. Every battlefield I walk onto stops being terrain and starts being a floor plan, and the enemy is now fighting my renovation schedule. The first live demo sold the whole class. A routine monster den, a routine engagement, except this time when the boss committed to its charge, I put an archer tower behind me mid-fight, 30 seconds of build time compressed by pixie hands into 6, and the boss's charge arrived at a fortification that had not existed when the charge began. It stopped. It looked at the tower. I want to testify under oath that a Tier 4 monster performed the exact head tilt of a man returning to where he parked. Then the tower shot it, and I placed a trap pit behind it during the confusion, and it backed into that, and from inside the pit it had time to reflect on the modern condition before the dolls arrived. The dolls. I keep mentioning the self-destruct doll factory like it's normal. It is not normal. It's a small, cheerful building that produces small, cheerful wooden people who toddle toward the enemy with their arms out like toddlers wanting a hug, and the hug is not survivable. My centaurs learned to open lanes for doll columns the way city traffic parts for ambulances, respectfully and at speed. And outside combat, an architect designs. That's what the inspiration stat is for. I sat down that first night with Creeder's pen, sketched an original building out of my own head, and the pen caught fire with golden light, and the 10% chance fired on my very first roll. The design crystallized into something the system called a miracle-grade building, a prophet's hut. The blueprint's aura alone rattled the sacred flame of Silver Snow City hard enough that the city lord scrambled his guards looking for the intruder. And I stood in Kalen's guest room holding my sketchbook like a student caught smoking, thinking, in my defense, the pen started it. I mailed wonder blueprints to the studio like postcards. Sun Mei got a griffin to ride, a proud female named Skyfall, who tolerated Mei and adored me, which caused daily jealousy incidents I want no credit for. And back home, my territory had its first domestic crisis. Food went missing from the stores. Elion, my bespectacled administrator, conducted an investigation with the gravity of a murder trial, terrified of what I'd do to the culprit. Because Elion grew up under the tower, where the punishment for a fairy stealing bread is the kind of thing you don't put in a story like this. The culprit was Celestine, the mythical landlady, eating my warehouse the way weather eats coastlines. I fined her 3 mushrooms, put up a sign that said please ask first, and moved on. Elion stood there holding his little clipboard, waiting for the executions, and slowly understood there wouldn't be any. Not now, not ever, not here. The system measured whatever happened inside that small chest and printed the highest loyalty rating I have ever seen on any creature. 120. The scale stops at 100. The extra 20 is just Elion. Then I went hunting, because my centaurs had a grudge to pay, and I'd promised them the interest too. The werewolf tribes of the region learned that week why you don't feature in a centaur's origin story. Somewhere in the campaign I clipped a player by accident, an arrow through the hat of a guild girl called Miss Mei Li, which bought me a comedy of apologies and a useful acquaintance. And at the end of the Grudge Road waited the real test, a Stage 6 hero battle, a demonic giant werewolf boss with an actual werewolf wizard hero commanding it. My first enemy hero. Heroes buff their armies, think, adapt. You can't kite a thinker forever. You can, however, renovate him. The Miss Mei Li incident first, since my centaurs still bring it up at parties. Mid-campaign, tracking a wolf pack through birch cover, I loosed at a gray shape moving wrong, and the gray shape was the fur trim on the hat of one Miss Mei Li of the Shui Yue Jinghua Guild, out gathering herbs, whose hat I removed from her head at 40 meters like a magic trick with a complaint process. There followed the most polite standoff in server history, her guildmates arriving in force, my centaurs forming up, everyone aiming and apologizing simultaneously. And it resolved into compensation, laughter, and a friend list entry that would matter later, because her guild ran the best information network in 3 regions and Miss Mei Li herself turned out to collect gossip the way Kalen collects art. The hat, repaired, allegedly hangs on her guild wall labeled First Contact. I built the battlefield before he entered it, towers and traps in layers, let his wolves break like water on masonry, and took the wizard's head with an arrow volley through a kill corridor he never realized was a corridor. First hero kill on my ledger. The build-out for that fight took all night in advance, because the wizard was a caster hero, and caster heroes punish stationary formations. So I built a formation that lied about being stationary. 3 arrow towers in a triangle, obvious, inviting, and between them, nothing but innocent meadow, which was 4 trap pits and a doll lane wearing a meadow costume. The wizard opened exactly by the book. area bombardment on my towers, committing his wolves to the gaps between them, straight down the lanes the towers appeared to leave uncovered. And the meadow did its work. And by the time he understood that the fortification was bait and the empty ground was the fortress, his army was underground or exploded, and his escape line ran through my sword dancers, which is not an escape line, it's a queue. During the loot roll, my dice and the game's dice physically ground against each other and crumbled to dust, which Celestine later explained, snacking, as two luck systems arguing over custody of me. The goddess of luck does not share. Noted, and honestly, flattered. The crystal mine finished the week. What was flagged as a mining site turned out to be a dungeon with a story in it, murals of a dead civilization, mummies with opinions. And at the bottom, a special event the game called Protect the Crystal Dragon Egg. Tower defense mode, waves scaling up and up, all the way to a Tier 7 Ghost Dragon, which is the kind of enemy that shows up in endgame raid guides with 3 pages of warnings. Tower defense. Against an architect. The one genre where my class isn't strong, but simply cheating. The dungeon leading down to that event earned its place in this story too. The murals came first, a whole gallery of them under the mountain. A dead civilization's family album, carved crowds bowing to something egg-shaped, carrying it up a mountain, defending it in battle after battle, until the last panel, which nobody had finished carving. Then came the mummies, dry old custodians who attacked anything that touched the walls, and completely ignored anyone who bowed to the murals first. A puzzle that took me one death of a scouting doll to solve, and that made me like these dead people enormously. They didn't build guards, they built manners, and enforced them. By the time I reached the bottom chamber and found the actual crystal egg from the murals, still warm after a dead age, still waiting, I wasn't treasure hunting anymore, I was staff. The tower defense event didn't feel like an event, it felt like a shift change, the last custodians handing the newest one his schedule. I stacked kill corridors, Gatling centaurs, magic shields, and my beloved self-destruct doll factory. And when the ghost dragon finally corkscrewed down out of the dark, it landed on a minefield of waddling explosives and the reward screen. The mine paid me an unlimited coin bag, 2,000 gold a day, forever. A magic shield war blueprint. A mythic building blueprint called the Crystal Heart, soulbound, with a description so quietly ominous I filed it under later. The description, for the curious, ran 4 lines. Requirements involving a capital-scale city and a resource figure with more digits than my whole economy. A single listed effect, Sanctuary of the Last Clutch, unexplained. And a final line in the mural's dead language, which my quiz garden education translated against my will as, "When the sky opens, bring them here." When the sky opens. I stood in a treasure chamber a mile underground, 3 years from a date only I knew, holding a dead civilization's evacuation plan addressed to whoever would listen. And the mountain was very quiet. I filed it under later the way you file a will, carefully, and did not sleep well. And one small item that outweighed everything, a single scale of a crystal dragon. One use, transform, briefly, into a Tier 8 mythic dragon. Tier 8, a pocket apocalypse on a keychain. I hung it around my neck next to Harper's bracelet and thought about a front line out west, 2 months away, and an old night I was saving it for. The Ghost Dragon wave, for the record, was closer than my summary makes it sound. It didn't fly in politely. It phased, in and out of solid, immune on the beat, vulnerable off the beat, and it spent its immunity frames drifting through my walls like smoke with a skeleton in it. Half my towers couldn't touch it. The doll minefield worked only because Xiao Li, watching my stream from 3 provinces away, timed the phase rhythm against the tower flashes and messaged me the beat like a metronome, 4 seconds solid, 6 seconds smoke, and I detonated the dolls in waves against the 4 count while the shield held the egg chamber. When it finally crashed, it dissolved with an exhale that frosted the entire cavern, and in the frost on the crystal egg, for 1 second, I saw the mural crowd's shapes, bowing. Then the frost slid off, and the reward screen ruined the mood in the best way. The intelligence started flowing in on its own after that. A trap chest dropped me into the local thieves guild, who operate on 4 solemn principles they recited to me with genuine pride, and who sell stolen treasure at prices that offend the original owners. I bought the whole shelf. The 4 principles were recited to me by a guild elder with the solemnity of scripture, so consider this their official publication. 1. Never steal from the poor, no margin in it. 2. Never steal the last of anything. That's not theft, that's cruelty, and cruelty is bad for repeat business. 3. Always know what you're holding. An ignorant thief is a courier for other people's problems. 4, and he tapped the counter here, everything is for sale except the principles. I told him those were better ethics than 2 of the 9 faction governments I could name, and he agreed so instantly that I suspect they benchmark. And with the goods came gossip, the expensive kind. The royal court suspected a certain Sir Thorn of the Western Front of disloyalty. 4 legendary heroes had been quietly assigned to watch him. The name meant everything to me. Sir Thorn of the Blackwood family. Harper's grandfather. The greatest knight of the age, and the court he'd bled for was already measuring his coffin. I paid the guild elder for everything on that thread, and it painted an ugly, familiar canvas. The knight was winning too well out west. That was his actual crime. 6 enemy cities taken while the court's favored commanders stalled. And in the capital's arithmetic, a hero the people love more than the throne is not an asset appreciating, it's a debt maturing. 4 legendary watchers assigned, supply requisitions delayed in committee. The thieves analyst, a halfling with ink-stained fingers, summed up the file with professional detachment. They'll starve his line quiet, or find him a glorious death, sir. It's the oldest renovation there is. I tipped him for the vocabulary and left with my jaw tight, because in my past life this exact file had ended exactly that way, and the girl with the toolbox had worn gray for a year. The clock in my head got louder, so I stacked the fires higher. Shenze rolled back into my territory with a fairy clock tower blueprint and news, and I asked him for something bigger than trade goods, 200 fairies willing to become my subjects. He didn't ask why. He'd seen my mill fairies, fat and happy and paid. He just started planning routes and refused my payment, and the system nudged his friendship score up again, and somewhere in his little chest, 3 weeks kept running out. 46 days on his quest clock. I hadn't forgotten. I was building toward it with everything I had. Meanwhile, my territory crossed 10 buildings, which quietly unlocked the biggest requirement in the mid-game, eligibility for city construction. City construction needs a city building order, a drop so rare that guilds field hundreds of players for one. My studio farmed the chaos waves at my territory for a week of nights. We pulled orders for the whole roster, and my own draw came up gold-stamped, an SSR grade order, alongside a lucky bird trinket that completed a set I'd been assembling on the sly, the Harp of Fortune, a level 4 combination artifact that turns luck from a stat into a lifestyle, which is when the landlady finally presented her invoice. Celestine, mid-mushroom, tricked me into a formal oath with the grace of a lawyer who does this for fun, and the contract snapped shut around me with the weight of divine paperwork. 2nd class acquired, Apostle of Fate. Double experience cost on all my levels, forever. In exchange, luck woven into everything I do, and once per battle, fate itself deals me a card. Double leveling cost, with my deadline. I cursed for 10 minutes. Celestine listened, nodded along like a critic at a poetry reading, and said the goddess sends her regards. Every gift has a price tag. I paid it, tuned the Harp of Fortune. The trickery itself was a masterclass I didn't enjoy being enrolled in. She'd asked me, conversationally, over a week, a series of tiny, hypothetical questions. Would I say luck had treated me well? Did I consider gifts binding? If a lady did someone a favor repeatedly, would that someone owe her? Each one answered casually. Each answer, it turns out, a clause. On the 7th day, she recited my own 7 answers back to me, in order, in my own voice, which she can apparently do. And the air went formal. The system stitched my scattered small talk into a contract and stamped it. I demanded to see a lawyer. She said she was the lawyer. I demanded to see her supervisor. She pointed upward with a mushroom, and somewhere overhead, faintly, unmistakably, a dice roll echoed across a clear sky, and moved to the next name on my war ledger. This one I'd been circling since my past life, because this one isn't a monster or a rival. The Mercury Refinery, the place where the tower turns fairies into product. I found the site through an old memory and a treasure map, and what waited there was a memory dungeon, the diaries of a refinery master named Morley, 8 volumes, in which he recorded with clerical pride his methods. Fairies drowned in mercury, cast into decorative statues, sold to mage collectors, and, the proudest entry, 1 shipment to the Thunder Titan's court itself. The dungeon's halls were lined with his inventory. Hundreds of small silver figures, each one a person, each pose the last thing they did. There is no joke in this paragraph. I buried every statue on a green hill above the river, all of them, and it took the whole day. My fairies worked beside me in total silence, and Elian polished each one clean before it went into the ground. He knew some of them. That's the part I didn't put in any report. Halfway down the 2nd gallery, Elian stopped in front of one small statue, a mill fairy caught mid-turn, looking back over her shoulder at something. and he took off his spectacles and cleaned them very slowly, twice. Then he said, in his careful administrator's voice, "This one taught me letters," and put his spectacles back on and kept working. That night, I amended the plans for my future city, quietly, with one line item that has survived every budget review since. A hill. A green one, above whatever river we get, with room. Morley's echo still ran the refinery below, fat and prosperous and eternal. I did not kite him. I built a snowball tower on the heights above his yard, and I fed him his own schedule, slowly, methodically, at the pace of a production line. And when it was over, the system gave me the refinery's mercury mine, 16 units a day, forever. Fairy hands would never work that vein again. The souls on the hill sent me a warmth I have no stat name for, and my true god quest, liberation of the fairy clan, pulsed once in my log like a heartbeat, as if to say, "Now you understand the assignment." Yeah, I understand it. Tower, you and I are not done. We have not even printed the invitations, and here I'll show you something I only learned much later, a scene from the other side of the board, because you should know the enemy was never asleep. In Silver Snow City that same month, in an office above the factories, a tower administrator filed a report about anomalies in the northern accounts, a refinery gone silent, a mill contract lapsed with all assets voluntarily relocated, a phrase the form had no box for, a slum's grain consumption rising, which meant someone was feeding surplus fairies, which meant inefficiency, which meant someone with money had contracted sentiment, the most contagious of the accounting diseases. The administrator proposed an inquiry. His superior, a mage with rings on every finger, read the report, weighed the cost of curiosity against the quarter's targets, and stamped it low priority. And that stamp, that one lazy stamp, bought me months. Remember it. Empires don't fall to their enemies first. They fall to their own filing system. The harp earned its keep immediately. I'd broken it in the night before at a camp concert, which had become a thing we do, my whole strange nation, around one big fire. And me on the harp of fortune, which plays itself 2 beats better than whatever you actually attempt. The fairies taught everyone their ideal village song that night. Verse by verse, hundreds of small voices and my centaurs humming the low line, Elian conducting with his pencil stub, Celestine on a roof pretending not to sing and audibly singing, and the harp wove luck through the whole thing, until the fireflies came down and spiraled the camp in time with the chorus. Wang Bo, connected by voice chat from his distant graveyard empire, complained that his skeletons had started swaying. Server first, probably. Dancing Dead by Remote Folk Concert. Its strings hummed me toward a buried treasure map, which required befriending a suspicious wood elf ranger named Gu Feng, which I achieved by inventing a tragic backstory for myself on the spot, with such conviction that I nearly cried at my own childhood. The map led to a level 30 chest. The befriending, in the interest of transparency about my methods, went like this. Gu Feng trusted no strangers, sold to no strangers, and spoke to strangers only down the length of a drawn arrow, which I respected, because that's a survivor's etiquette. So I didn't approach as a stranger. I camped a polite distance off, audibly, badly, sympathetically, a lone traveler having a hard week. And I let him observe me fail to cook a fish for a while. Then I told the fire, at length, my tragic backstory, which I composed live. An exiled apprentice fleeing a cruel master, robbed by a false friend, seeking one honest treasure to buy back his tools. It was shameless. It had a dead mother in it. By the second evening, Gu Feng was correcting my fish technique out of pure pain. By the third, he decided we were colleagues in misfortune, and the map came out with the fish oil, freely offered, one wronged man to another. I did, later, after the chest, come back and tell him the truth, because there's a line between a con and a debt. He stared at me, said, "The dead mother too," and when I nodded, he laughed until he had to sit on a log, and we've traded honestly ever since. Best client I ever defrauded into friendship. I was nowhere near level 30. I dug it up anyway and put it in storage, because a locked box is just a scheduled victory. Then I went to a witch's hut for tutoring, and the witch turned out to be a succubus named Xian Mei, a fellow apostle of the magic goddess, all velvet voice and predatory amusement, who agreed to teach me intermediate wisdom in exchange for company and conversation. The lessons took 7 hours. I crawled out of that hut at dawn with a new support skill and the complexion of a man who has donated blood to a very charming clinic, while she waved from the doorway and told me to come back soon, sweetheart. I have never studied so hard or regretted a diploma less. Also, I checked my wallet twice. Somehow, she'd only taken my dignity. The pedagogy, for the record, was real. Whatever else Xian Mei plays at, the succubus knows magic theory the way rivers know downhill, and she taught in riddles that assembled themselves into understanding about an hour after each session, timed, I'm certain. So you'd think of her when the coin dropped. Twice during the lessons, her voice slipped into a register that wasn't performance, once explaining why the magic goddess values curiosity over power, and once, oddly, asking what I planned to do about the tower, a question I hadn't mentioned, in a tone that already knew. I gave her a merchant's non-answer. She smiled like a proctor reading a good exam and changed the subject, and I left with the distinct sensation of having been scouted for something with no job listing. The level 30 chest, once I qualified to open it, staged a gauntlet of minigames, the finale of which was mahjong against a unicorn, an evil eye, and a Cerberus, all three of whom cheated with a shamelessness I found genuinely inspiring. The Cerberus played 3 hands at once. I out-cheated the table anyway with dice blessed by a jealous goddess, and the chest upgraded itself to level 42 and paid out a level 5 treasure called War Shackles. Let me read the table's minutes into the record. The unicorn palmed tiles in its mane, which I could prove but couldn't phrase politely. The evil eye literally watched everyone's hands with independent eyeballs and had the audacity to accuse me of peeking. And the Cerberus, playing 3 hands, colluded with itself, left head trading signals to right head via ear position, while middle head kept up an innocent commentary about the weather. I called exactly none of it out. You don't win a rigged game by appealing to the referee. There was no referee. The referee was also a prize inside the chest. You win a rigged game by being the beloved godchild of the casino. And every time the cheating pushed the odds against me, my dice came home anyway, wearing little invisible halos. And by the final round, the Cerberus's 3 heads were arguing among themselves about which of them was secretly working for me. None of you, gentlemen. Management works for me. Read this one carefully, because it wins about 4 wars later in the story. War Shackles. When 2 heroes fight, it locks the doors. No fleeing, no surrender. Fight until one side falls, and the winner takes the loser's treasures. It is a dual contract, a bear trap, and an inheritance lawyer welded into one item, and the flavor text says it's a component of an artifact called the God of War set. I hugged it. Every villain on this continent had just lost the right to run away from me. The flavor text on the shackles, by the way, included a history paragraph I reread several times. Because it named the artifact's previous owners, 4 of them, each a famous duelist of a dead century, each of whom, the text noted with the driest possible phrasing, eventually met someone worse inside their own locked door. A weapon that guarantees the fight ends is also a weapon that guarantees your fight's end, all of them, including the last one. I filed that warning where I file all good warnings, prominently, and proceeded to ignore it on schedule, which is the relationship most men have with their best warnings. The big guilds, meanwhile, had found their own prize and were about to start a war over it. A royal griffin nest, the recruitment source for one of the best flying units in the game, with World Domination's 5 contracted legends on one ridge and the Angel Faith Guild on the other, mutual wipe guaranteed, nest destroyed in the crossfire, everybody loses. I invited both leaderships to a neutral tent and offered to solve it. Blaze of World Domination looked at me, the lucky newbie who kept turning up like a coin in every couch on the server, and asked what I would do that 2 armies couldn't. I soloed the nest. There's a buff called Dragon Possession I knew how to earn nearby, and with it, plus towers, plus the harp humming luck into every roll, I cleared the trial the nest demanded and won the right to relocate it. Then I auctioned that right on the spot. Blaze paid the equivalent of $6.5 million in real money without blinking. Angel Faith bought the consolation package for $500,000. Both guilds walked away convinced they'd won and equally convinced of a second thing, which quietly became server consensus that week. Blaze stayed behind after the signing, ostensibly to verify the contract seals, actually to stand next to me at the tent flap and say, without looking over, "You knew the solo clause was in there before you called this meeting." Statement, not question. I poured him the last of the tea. He drank it like evidence and left. And that night, his guild's internal wiki, I would eventually learn, gained a new page with restricted access and my name on it. And the page's edit history shows one contributor returning night after night, adding incidents, like a man picking at a knot. Do not fight the newbie. Hire him. The tent negotiation itself ran 40 minutes, and I'd pay gold to have the recording. Two guilds delegations who'd been sniping each other's supply lines for a week, seated on opposite benches with matching folded arms, and me at the head with a kettle, playing host, referee, and auctioneer in rotation. Angel Faith's leader, Jian Yu, opened with scripture-adjacent rhetoric about rightful claims. Blaze countered with a spreadsheet. I let them exhaust their openers, then put the actual math on the table, projected nest casualties for a contested siege against the trial's solo clear clause buried in its quest text that neither of their strategists had read to the bottom. The silence while both benches speed-read the clause was my favorite music. Then both leaders looked up at the one person present who was absurdly, provably good at solo trials, and the auction began itself. I just kept pouring tea. The clear itself, once the contracts were signed, was my most watched fight to date, both guilds spectating from the ridges like a stadium crowd with binoculars and grudges. The nest trial spawned defense waves keyed to the challenger's strength, and dragon possession, the buff I'd quietly earned at a shrine 2 valleys over, is a cheat against exactly this kind of scaling. Because the trial reads your base numbers, and the buff arrives after the reading, like smuggling a professional into an amateur league inside a birthday cake. Even so, the final wave, the nest matriarch herself, a royal griffin the size of a house with a shriek that unhorsed 2 of my archers, took everything on my belt, towers, dolls, harp. And one improvised maneuver involving my last trap pit and her own dive momentum that the forum clipped, slowed down, and set to music. When she finally yielded, she yielded like royalty, one wing folded, head high, and I dismounted and bowed to her first, in front of both guilds. Because you can buy a relocation contract, but you cannot buy what that gesture bought me with every griffin on the continent. While the money counted itself, the world moved. A server-wide main quest chimed for every player at once, the kind of bell that starts eras. Rebellion in the south. A duchess named Sosa had risen against the crown, the church was mobilizing, and the great war of my past life cleared its throat. 2 months had become weeks. I looked at the quest text and saw the first domino of the Western Front, and somewhere behind it, Harper's family standing in the fall line. Level 40, faster. The Rebellion quest also rearranged the whole server's furniture overnight, and the view from my tent was instructive. Guild stocks of grain and iron tripled in price by morning. Castle players got faction mobilization notices with glory language and quiet, non-optional undertones. Hell players reported their quest boards lighting up like festivals because someone else's civil war is Hell's favorite weather. And every big guild's strategy department simultaneously discovered that their war plans had a hole shaped like accurate intelligence. Which is why my mailbox, mine, the mailbox of an unaffiliated newbie in a refugee camp, accumulated 11 discrete consulting inquiries in 48 hours, 3 of them from guilds that had never spoken to me, one of them written in the careful tone of a diplomat addressing a foreign power. Week 5. I was a foreign power by week 5. The Mud Pit and I were very proud. I took the studio to Silver Snow City to collect from Kalen, and the old man was in rare form, partly because the goddess of luck had incinerated his mansion. The trip also debuted the studio's newest secret weapon, because Xiao Li arrived wearing a new class like a tailored coat. Magic Recorder, unique, self-found, the reward of a hidden chain he'd solved from a 2-line hint in my guide and 400 hours of his own stubbornness. And its power is exactly his personality rendered as mechanics. He transcribes observed spell work into reusable script. Watch a spell, write the spell, own the spell, within limits that he was already when I met him at the gate, 3 theories deep into circumventing. 17 years old. The tower's whole academy system exists to produce 1 archmage a generation, and my studio had grown a rough draft of one in a rented office on instant noodles. The tower, when it eventually learns this, is going to be so upset. Not a metaphor. His collection wing had burned down in a freak accident with a suspiciously smug aura shortly after he'd acquired a figurine of a certain dream fairy and been observed. And I quote the witness reports, wiping it with a cloth tenderly. The goddess registered her review of this behavior in fire. Kalen, a broken man, traded me 2 premium blueprints, a riverside market and a thatched hut, for a replacement folio and my solemn oath to never tell anyone what he kept in the East Wing. I arrived, for context, while the ruins were still smoking, and found my master standing before them in his dressing gown with the stillness of classical statuary. The fire inspector fairy explaining, with visible confusion, that the blaze had ignited from no source, spread against the wind, consumed one wing with surgical precision, and gone out by itself at the property line. Freak accident, the report said. The report had not seen what I saw, which was the burn pattern, because the fire had spared his drafting studio, spared his library, spared his students' dormitory, and taken only the collection wing, the whole collection wing, and nothing but the collection wing, with the itemized precision of a jealous woman reading someone else's love letters by matchlight. I looked up at the sky. The sky looked back innocently. My teacher never connected it. I connected it instantly and resolved to keep my own art commissions strictly professional forever. I'm telling you now because the statute of limitations is presumably divine, and I am presumably doomed. Outside the city walls, the joke stopped. There's a slum out there the maps don't label, a shantytown of fairies, the surplus ones, the used-up ones, the ones the tower's factories no longer rent. They live on scraps and weather. This is where Shenza's food caravans go. And when he walked the lanes with us, small and tired with his enormous ledger, the whole camp lit up like a festival, hundreds of tiny people chanting his name, bringing him gifts they couldn't afford. He took none of it and paid for everything twice. My studio went very quiet. Wang Bo, our loudest man, our future undead emperor, watched a one-armed fairy try to give Shenze her only blanket and said, "Boss, whatever the plan is against the tower, write me down for the front row. Front row, second row, and the ticket booth, brother, all reserved." There was one more moment in the slum I keep. An old fairy matriarch, wings long past flight, ran the camp's soup line out of a shed. And when Shenze tried to leave coin for the pot, she chased him down the lane, waving a ladle, shouting that saints eat free, which is how I learned the slums had already given him the title, years before the system got around to it. Then she caught sight of me, squinted, went quiet, and said to the lane in general, "And that one's the storm coming to knock the tower down. Don't crowd him, he's still growing." I asked Shenze afterward what she'd meant. He said the old ones see things. I said, "See what, exactly?" He bought me a honey bun and changed the subject with the smoothness of a man protecting a prophecy from its own subject. We farmed the chaos waves together that night, 5 players against the dark, and the dark sent a hero, a giant gold golem synthesizer commanded by a puppet master, which we cracked with a trap formation and a canyon stampede. City building orders for the entire studio. Chen Wei handed his to Wang Bo with a shrug that said empires need real estate. The golem hero fight within that night was the studio's graduation exam, and we passed it as a unit for the first time. The puppet master hero synthesized golems mid-battle, fusing its wrecked units into bigger ones, so damage literally fed it, which invalidates everyone's normal job. I called the shape, a trap formation in 8 segments around a canyon mouth, Chen Wei's archers as the lure line, Xiao Li counterspelling the fusion casts to stagger their timing, Sun Mei and her griffin herding strays like a sheepdog with air support, Wang Bo's skeletons as the disposable fence, reassembled free of charge whenever the golems broke it. We drove the whole synthesis engine into the canyon and collapsed the walls on schedule. And when the dust settled, 5 players who'd been carrying folders of my homework for a month stood there looking at each other with the specific grin of a band that just played it. And my Demon Duke certificate came up in a burst of ominous purple light that made everyone lean back, except May, who leaned in and said, "Ooh, evil, do another." The certificate's fine print was a staffing puzzle worth explaining because it shaped the southern trip. Demon Duke UR grade transforms a demon-blooded hero into top-tier command material. And demon-blooded heroes are not found. They're inherited, hidden half-blood NPCs scattered in the world's margins. I knew of exactly one within reach, a woman called Serafina, serving as an indentured attendant in Potato City's noble quarter, unrecognized, unpromoted, her bloodline sleeping. In my past life, a Hell Guild found her in Year 3, and she became a name armies detoured around. In this life, I intended to get there first, with a job offer and better dental, which is the entire Liu Chuan doctrine in one sentence. Find the discarded legend early, arrive before history does, bring paperwork. First, a heist. Treasure had been vanishing from a master craftswoman's workshop in the city, and the craftswoman was Philomena, a shape-shifting djinn of dangerous charm and, my magic eye whispered, secretly clergy of the magic goddess. The thief was invisible, a Tier 5 mirror-hidden ghost, which is why the city guard had found nothing for a month. I stacked Magic Eye with a peeping trick from a clever hat, spotted the shimmer on the 3rd night, baited it with a dream fairy sitting alone like an unattended purse, and we folded the ghost in half. It had been stealing to order. Its employer's trail pointed to a debt-ridden city lord named Zhou Lei, a name I marked in the ledger without yet knowing it would soon be written in fire. The stakeout itself was 3 nights of pure detective comedy. Night 1, nothing, unless you count Zhao Li falling asleep in a barrel he'd insisted was the optimal vantage point. Night 2, I caught the shimmer for half a second and lost it, and spent an hour afterward accusing a perfectly innocent curtain. Night 3, we did it properly. The dream fairy planted on a workbench beside a fake artifact, glowing softly, projecting the exact aura of an unattended valuable. And the ghost drifted in through the wall at the hour ghosts consider clever. The moment it reached for the bait, every prepared light in the room came up at once, and 4 myriad sword dancers arrived at the same address. A Tier 5 stealth unit is terrifying while hidden. Revealed, mid-reach, in a lit room full of teleporting knives, it is a filing cabinet with regrets. Philomena paid us in tailored alchemy treasures for the whole studio, plus a disease-curing ring I mailed straight to Harper's Village. And as I left, she touched my shoulder and said, in a voice that wasn't quite hers, "The magic goddess sends her regards," and taught my magic eye its 2nd level in a single sentence. 2 goddesses now, watching. I'd like to say it felt reassuring, but it mostly felt like living in a snow globe owned by 2 collectors who don't share shelves. And then, the shelf shook. Red border, full screen. The alert I hate most in this world. Shenze was dying. Here's what happened while I was playing detective in the city. Zhou Lei, the debt-ridden lord from the heist trail, ran a second business the ledgers never showed. He and a mage named Kale were feeding a slave ring, knoll catchers snatching fairies off the roads and selling them north to the undead markets, where a fairy's fate has the word skeleton in it. And that week their catchers hit a column of refugees Shenze was personally escorting out of the slums. Rock spikes came up through the road. Shenze had half a second and a choice, and he spent both the only way he knew. He shielded a Christmas fairy named Barnaby with his own body. When I burst into the camp, the healers had him on a table, and the only reason there was still a him at all was a shimmer of divine shielding around his chest. 4 faint colors, 4 goddesses paying attention, holding a merchant's ledger of a life open at 1 hit point. Barnaby told me how it happened, once he could talk without shaking. The column had been moving at dusk, families and handcarts, and Shenze walking the line as always, counting heads, when the ground sang wrong under them. He was 3 carts away from Barnaby when the spikes triggered. 3 carts crossed in under a second by a merchant with no combat class, no buffs, and no hesitation recorded anywhere in the logs, because you can't log a decision that was made years before the moment arrived. That's what I understood, sitting by that table all night. Some people don't decide to shield others. They've simply already decided, permanently, long ago, and the world just occasionally schedules the paperwork. The investigation into the ambush took me 2 days, and each stone I turned was worse. The knoll catchers weren't freelancers. They ran routes, scheduled ones, with quotas and route maps, and their pay stubs, because slavers apparently have payroll, traced through 2 shell merchants back to Zhou Lei's treasury. The Northern Buyer's Manifest was the part I had to read standing up. Fairies, live, assorted, the manifest said, priced by the dozen, discounted for damage, and a delivery calendar stretching back 3 years. 3 years of route maps. I sat with that ledger a long time, and I did not show it to Shenze, and I did not show it to Elian. I memorized every name on it, and the trap I built afterward was not, whatever the forums decided, revenge. Revenge is hot. This was municipal. Somebody had been operating a pipeline through my world, and I am, before anything else, a man who reroutes infrastructure. Kalen arrived with Philomena, master healer, and she worked for an hour and came out and gave it to me straight. Stabilized. But his lifespan, the thing he'd been spending on everyone else for years, was running out the bottom of the glass. Weeks had become days. The only thing that could save him now was the advancement he'd refused to buy his whole life. An advancement isn't a potion, it's a ritual. The ritual needed a catalyst nobody could identify, an unknown item his quest had listed from day 1. I stood over his bed doing the puzzle with smoke coming off my brain. 46 days, the quest had said. It was day 45. The catalyst had to be something a merchant fairy would value above his own life, something tied to what he actually was, and at 3 in the morning, it landed. Not treasure. Candy. The 100 Flavors Fairy Candy, a festival sweet made in tiny batches in fairy communities, 146 flavors, 10 pieces of each, handed out on one night of the year. That night. It was that night. What followed was the strangest supply run in server history. I had Kalen burn his VIP privileges on teleport passes, and I hit every tower city on the map in one night, and in every single one, the moment fairies heard the name Shenza, doors opened. Slum camps emptied their festival tins. Mill fairies gave their one piece each. In a factory city, a foreman fairy shook out her own children's shares and pressed them into my hands and said, "Tell him it's from the Eastern Wheel Cruise. He'll remember us." City after city, the debt of years of quiet kindness got repaid in candy, and I stood in the last town square with my hat literally overflowing, doing arithmetic through something in my eye. 2 stops I'll never forget. In one river town, the fairies were mid-festival when I arrived, lanterns everywhere, and when I shouted the situation from the fountain rim, the entire festival stopped, and the entire festival formed a line, and a small fairy child at the front held up one piece of candy, her piece, the one she'd been saving visibly all evening, and asked me if this would be enough to fix Uncle Shinza. And I had to spend a moment adjusting my hood against the wind, which was not blowing, and in a factory city under the tower's biggest chimneys, where fairies are forbidden festivals entirely, they came anytime, out of vents and drain grates and lamp housings, dozens of them materializing around me in a dark alley, like the world's gentlest ambush, pressing wrapped pieces into my hands, fast and silent, and gone again before the patrol lamps swept through. Contraband candy, smuggled to save a saint. The tower has laws against fairy gatherings. It has no law yet against this, because it has never once understood what these people are. One city gave nothing, Mored. No fairies came, because Mored has no fairies anymore. Mored was Morley's city, the refinery man. I stood in its clean, silent, prosperous square for 1 minute, and I added a line to the tower's invoice, and I moved on. Word had spread to the players, too. World domination put 5,000 members on the roads that night, clearing monsters off my routes for free, because Blaze had decided that whatever I was doing was the winning side of history, and he wanted receipts. For once, I let the whales spray. The convoy escort those 5,000 players formed that night became server legend on its own. Someone in their command chat coined the phrase Candy Corridor, and the name stuck. And for 6 hours, there was a lit, guarded, monster-free highway across half the north, maintained by the richest guild alive, for one man carrying a hat of sweets to a dying fairy. Players who weren't even in the guild joined the line as I passed, torches coming up out of the dark on both sides of the road, and I rode the corridor at full gallop through a tunnel of stranger's light, and I've charged battlefields that moved me less. The forum thread documenting it, with route maps and torch photos, is titled "The Night the Server Held the Lamp," and I do not have a joke for that one. Some nights the whole absurd anthill of us gets something exactly right. Dawn, the ritual. 146 flavors, arranged in a spiral around a small, unconscious merchant. Success odds posted by the system at 0.5%. 0.5% into which the following parties leaned. Harper's bracelet on my wrist, burning warm, a Holy Spirit's blessing flowing out of it. My dream fairies singing. Celestine not eating anything, for the first time in recorded history, hands pressed together. And 4 faint colors in the air. 4 goddesses with their thumbs on the scale, shameless, all of them, and welcome to it. The 0.5% came up. I'll tell you the exact texture of that moment. The system displays ritual progress as a thread of light being pulled through the dark, and everyone watched that thread crawl, and it frayed twice. Twice, visibly, strands separating, the whole camp's breath stopping. And both times the fray hit a knot of warm gold coming off the bracelet on my wrist, and simply could not finish tearing. Like the universe kept trying to write no, and a 15-year-old's handmade wire kept autocorrecting it to not yet. And behind the gold, 4 colors leaned in with the combined mass of 4 divine opinions. And somewhere, Celestine's small hands were pressed so tight her knuckles glowed. Light stood on that table in a column, and when it drained away, Shenza floated an inch above the boards, asleep, breathing, and changed. The system printed it in gold. Tier 6, miracle grade, Saint Fairy, the first in centuries, and under his name a hero's title, High Saint, with an aura that promotes every fairy troop in his battles by 1 full tier. And under that, a line of epitaph text signed by the goddess of wealth herself, which I will quote exactly because I've never deleted the screenshot. He gave everything and asked nothing. Heaven pays its debts. He woke up 2 days later, tried to apologize for the fuss, discovered his own status pain, and cried like a tap. Then he tried to give me candy as a thank you, and I had to leave the room to keep my composure, which is a sentence I never expected in my war memoirs. His first act as a saint, once he could walk, was an audit. Write that down somewhere permanent. The first Tier 6 fairy in centuries, a being whose battle aura promotes his whole race, spent his first upright morning going through the candy ledger, insisting on recording every donor city and every anonymous piece, because debts of kindness, he explained, accrue interest fastest of all, and he would be repaying them personally, in route order. The list ran 9 pages. He has, at time of telling, worked through 6 of them. The tower thinks power looks like a lightning bolt on a mountain. I've seen what it actually looks like. It looks like a small person with a ledger, alive out of spite and gratitude in equal parts, paying back candy with interest, city by city, while his aura quietly makes everyone around him more than they were. Right, sentiment filed. Now the invoice. Zhou Lei thought distance and title protected him. I built the collection route personally. Xiao Li, our baby-faced genius, went in as bait with a story about a vampire bride and a dowry, scripted by me down to the pauses. And Zhou Lei, greedy and indebted, walked out of his walls to meet him with his mage Kale and his private army of 900 obsidian gargoyles. Xiao Li's performance should have its own award category. The script I wrote him ran 9 pages, backstory, verbal tics, a nervous habit of touching his collar when lying about money, planted specifically so Zhou Lei's appraisers would catch him lying about small sums and conclude the big sum was real. The kid rehearsed for 2 days and delivered a nervous young noble intermediary so convincing that Zhou Lei's own steward pulled him aside to offer, quietly, a better commission if he switched employers, which was not in my script, and which Xiao Li improvised through by pretending to be tempted for exactly the right number of seconds. When the meeting was set, Zhou Lei greedy walked out of his fortress with his full guard, because my script had him bringing treasure, and greed believes in symmetry. It assumes everyone brings what it would bring. I was waiting with the studio, and when the trap closed, I did 2 things in one breath. I slapped down war shackles, welding the doors of the world shut. No retreat, no surrender, winner takes everything. And I crushed the crystal dragon scale. I'd been saving it for the Western Front. Some bills can't wait. The world went white, and where a level nothing half-elf had been standing, there was a Tier 8 mythic crystal dragon the size of a cathedral. And I want to describe the tactical intricacies of the fight that followed, but there weren't any. I inhaled the gargoyle army, 900 obsidian statues into the recycling. Kale the mage face-planted into the mud and stayed there, negotiating with the mud. Zhou Lei tried every escape item in his very expensive collection, and every one of them bounced off the shackle's locked doors with a small, apologetic chime. Then the sentence was carried out, and the ledger of every fairy he'd ever sold got its final stamp. I'll describe the transformation once, because there will never be another. The scale went to powder in my fist, and the powder went through me like winter, and then I was not wearing a body so much as commanding a landscape. Crystal from horizon to horizon of myself. My thoughts came slower and enormously heavier, like cathedral bells instead of words, and 900 gargoyles, a private army that had bankrupted lesser lords, registered in my new senses as approximately gravel. The inhale was not tactics. Tier 8 does not have tactics against Tier Nothing. It has weather. I remember Zhou Lei's face during those 30 seconds, the full journey of it, from contempt to confusion to the very specific arithmetic of a man watching 900 bodyguards become a light snack, and arriving at the answer, which was that he had, at some point without noticing, sold a fairy belonging to something enormous. Kale, the mage, for completeness, survived the afternoon by achieving a posture I can only call load-bearing groveling, forehead in the mud, arms spread, producing a continuous stream of confessions so detailed and so eagerly organized that Xiao Li, taking notes beside him, twice asked him to slow down. He confessed to the slave routes. He confessed to the buyers. He confessed, unprompted, to tax matters we hadn't asked about and a stolen library book from his apprenticeship, at which point I understood we had broken through to bedrock. We traded his testimony to the regional authorities for jurisdiction papers, and his sentence, which I'm told involves supervised labor rebuilding fairy housing for a span of years, best measured in disbelief, was published in 3 cities. The tower filed no objection. The tower, I noted with interest, filed nothing at all, which meant somebody up there had weighed the cost of association and cut Zhou Lei loose posthumously. And that told me more about my real enemy than any battle yet had. They don't defend their instruments, they deprecate them. War Shackles then executed its favorite clause and transferred me his entire inventory, which contained 749,000 in debts and deeds, and one item that made me forget how to breathe. His diary was fake. Under the false cover sat a level 4 treasure called the Book of Mysteries, which once a month lets you read the hidden thoughts of anyone whose name you write, and inside the end papers, his patron Grimshaw's real project. Research notes: Undead and Gargoyle Fusion. The forging of a brand new Level 7 race, and through it, a private staircase to godhood. The system offered me the thread as an optional True God quest, and I looked at my war schedule, already double booked with a Titan and an Apocalypse, and closed the offer. Not declined, postponed. I put the nuclear paperwork in the vault. Some bombs you save for the right negotiation. Aftermath, in order. Cavelin took over the Dead Man's City, which put my teacher on an actual throne and improved his mood beyond all decency. His first week of governance was exactly what you'd expect from a genius recluse handed a municipality. He redesigned the traffic flow, doubled the artisan quarter, accidentally started an architectural renaissance, and had to be talked out of renaming the main plaza after a certain fairy figurine, by me, over dinner, using the phrase legacy considerations very slowly until it penetrated. He also, without telling me, established a small scholarship in the city for fairy craftsmen, the first of its kind anywhere in the tower's shadow, filed under vocational efficiency in the budget so the ministry wouldn't blink. My teacher, the pervert hermit, sneaking compassion past an empire disguised as accounting. The apple, I'm told, doesn't fall far, though in our case I genuinely can't tell anymore which of us is the tree. Shenze came to me with his entire hope caravan behind him, 500 fairies with their worldly goods on their backs, and formally joined my territory, and the joining had a ceremony I didn't design and couldn't have. The caravan drew up in the square, and Shenze, in his best coat, which is his regular coat brushed twice, stood before me and formally offered his company's charter. And behind him, 500 fairies did the thing from the old songs, each one placing one personal item on the ground at my feet, a cup, a comb, a bell, the ritual that means our households are now inside your walls. Elian, receiving the pile for cataloging, wept openly onto the manifest and had to be issued a second manifest. I gave the items back afterward, per the ritual's second half, each one returned by the Lord's own hand. All 500. It took 4 hours, and my hands learned every life in that caravan. And if you want to know why my fairies would later hold walls that soldiers ran from, it's because feudalism, done the way the songs meant it, is a two-way vow. And I'd signed my half in person. My fairy population quest advanced to its second stage and paid out a fairy tavern blueprint, a recruiting hall with no roster limit. My refugee camp was becoming a nation with a mud pit for a capital. The Fairy Ideal Land quest chain, ticking up to its second stage with the caravan's arrival, also sent me its progress note, and I want to log what the system considers progress, because it isn't population. The note listed as completed milestones, wages paid on time, a punishment refused, a debt of candy honored, a hill with statues on it. The quest that ends with a mythic building is grading me, it turns out, on receipts of decency, which means somewhere in this game's oldest code, someone defined the ideal village not as a place, but as a pattern of behavior, and the blueprint only exists where the pattern already does. I read that note twice, and then went and stood on the green hill for a while with my hands in my pockets, reporting to management. We sailed home down the river like a victory parade. A piranha bit Sun Mei. She bit back. I'm required by studio bylaws to report both facts. The piranha survived, was named Chomper, and traveled the rest of the river in a bucket as studio property, because Mei claimed salvage rights and nobody at this company has ever won an argument with the accountant. The voyage also gave us the Siren Bottle incident, a sealed message bottle fished from a nest flotsam containing a nautical chart and a love poem addressed to no one, which Wongbo read aloud in a pirate voice until the chart's coordinates sobered me up, because I recognized the sea region and the treasure marked there, and filed it in the long drawer, the one labeled after the city, before the war, if we live. And out west, while we celebrated, World Domination scouts finally connected the dots I'd been leaving them, that the war-torn little territory of Iwara was held by the Blackwood family, the most decorated name in human history, and reputation with that name might be the cheapest lottery ticket on the server. The whole guild descended on Harper's region to do good deeds for points. Thousands of the richest players alive, competitively repairing fences for a 15-year-old's approval. The scenes from that gold rush belong in a museum of misplaced intensity. Raid callers who commanded 400 players in dragon fights were observed arguing over optimal fence post spacing. A guild treasurer audited the village well. Somebody's elite strike team repainted the chapel twice because a rival team called their first coat streaky, and the resulting paint feud escalated until Alara came out and made both teams soup and they cried. Actual gratitude points, the currency they were all farming, flowed at a trickle throughout because the Blackwood reputation system, I could have told them for a fee, weighs sincerity, and sincerity was the one stat their builds had all dumped. Harper, for her part, processed the circus with the unimpressed practicality of her bloodline, put the strike teams on a chore rotation, and had the best organized village in the West by Sunday. 15 years old, logistics conquers all. I had engineered exactly none of it, and I endorsed all of it. Free labor is free labor, and the more armed philanthropists standing around that village, the better I slept. Because the calendar out west had almost run out, and hell reads calendars too. I went to Iwara first, ahead of trouble, and the visit started with an ambush of the domestic kind. Harper had learned to cook. Not normal cooking, treasure maker cooking. The girl's talent had leaked into the kitchen, and her stew carried actual stat bonuses, and she stood there white-knuckled while I ate, as if the fate of nations hung on my review. Best +2 Constitution soup on the continent, official ruling. The kitchen tour that followed was a hostage situation conducted by a teenager with a ladle. I was shown the spice shelf, organized by effect rather than flavor, because of course it was. I was informed that the bread had +1 to morale, and that this had been verified on villagers with a notebook of results, because of course there was a notebook. Her mother, Alara, stood in the doorway, watching her daughter talk at full speed with her hands flying, and caught my eye over the girl's head, and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." I pretended very hard to be absorbed in the stat bread, because some gratitude is too heavy to hold eye contact with. She'd made me something else, too. A cloak, sewn over months from materials she'd saved coin by coin, white as first snow, hooded, and the system appraised it with a name attached, Pure White Night Shadow. It became my flag, my signature, and eventually the thing bards describe before they describe my face. I gave her a keepsake in return, a protective ring from Philomena's workshop, and her collection of little silver charms clicked one step closer to completing a set she'd designed herself. A set the system said would one day let her teleport to family in danger. The word again. Family. The little sister I picked up in a ravine was arming herself to rescue me someday, and honestly, of the 2 of us, her odds looked fine. She'd also, in my absence, completed a small quest of her own that she was bursting to report, something her family's old faith calls the favor of the Holy Spirit Aruki, a gentle household spirit that watches over kept promises. And the proof of the favor was a flask of Holy Spirit water she'd earned, 1 dose, +1 to every stat, permanently. A treasure nobles would bid estates for. She gave it to me. Obviously, she gave it to me, before I could open my mouth, with the ruthless generosity of this entire family. And when I tried the speech about saving precious things for herself, she informed me, with a treasure maker's flat certainty, that a tool in storage is a tool wasted, and that I was the tool. Her mother laughed for a full minute. I drank my stat water and accepted my classification. And then, her recruitment quest, the one that would let her formally join my territory as a hero someday, finally showed its full requirements. And there it was, in system print, the mountain behind the mountains. Save her father. Alive, from a front line that history said was a grave, plus prosperity, plus a real city. The game was telling me the price of this family's future, and it was everything I was already building, delivered on time. Hell submitted its counteroffer that same week. A hell hero named Malachor, a pyromancer with a slaver's resume, came down on Iwara with a raiding force to take the Blackwood women as leverage against the front. He announced himself with fire on the horizon. And with a herald, formally, because hell does love its paperwork of terror, a horned officer riding the smoke line and reading, from an actual scroll, the enumerated demands. Surrender of the Blackwood women, tribute schedules, a clause about kneeling with subsections. Arthur the Old Knight listened to the whole recitation from the wall with professional patience, then gave his formal reply on behalf of the household, which consisted, in full, of resting his drawn sword on the parapet, pointing once at the river, and saying, "The ford's that way, wet your feet and find out." I have heard finer diplomacy, but never better, and Harper, I learned afterward, spent the whole battle in the cellar forge with the village children, not hiding, working, turning out repair clasps and bowstring rings by lamplight with 2 apprentice kids handing her wire, because her family's doctrine holds that everyone fights with what they have, and what she has is hands that make things stronger. The clasps went up the wall in baskets all afternoon. Half of Arthur's harness was her work by sundown. 15, and already running a wartime supply line out of a cellar. And if you're keeping a file on this family, and by now several nations were, That detail belongs on the first page. And world domination's good deed tourists suddenly found themselves in an actual war, and to their credit, they fought like maniacs. No coordination, no plan, suicide stalling in relays while their chat screamed slogans, and it bought exactly the minutes I needed. Because I came in from the water. Malicor's force had to cross the river shallows, and his shock troops were triangle demons, jumpers, ambushers, heavy as anvils. I'd parked stone-throwing sprites behind shield lines on barges, and when the demons jumped, my sprites met them mid-air with boulders, and heavy things that get hit sideways over water stop being ambushers and start being splashes. The timing on that trick was narrower than I've ever admitted publicly. Triangle demons jump in coordinated waves, and the first wave was airborne before my barges finished their turn. And for one suspended second, the geometry was pure future tense, 30 Annies in the air, my shield line still swinging around, the boulders already flying toward where physics said the two stories would intersect. If Malicor had staggered his waves, the second wave lands while my sprites reload, and this recap has a very different middle. He didn't stagger. Hell heroes never stagger, mass and momentum is their whole church, and I'd bet the river crossing on that theology. The boulders and the demons kept their appointment in the air over the shallows with a sound like a quarry falling downstairs. His backline tried the signature move, a blood drain ultimate that eats an army's health bar, and found my magic shield tower squatting in the middle of his casting radius, eating the spell like a rude houseguest. Then the shackles came down, doors locked, and Malicor learned what every villain in this story eventually learns about running. Blaze took the killing blow at my invitation. Politics is also architecture. The head of a hell hero, delivered on a server first, won world domination, the rights to found the first player city and the first official guild, twin announcements that shook every player alive. And the shaking had layers worth recording. For most players, it was pure spectacle, fireworks over someone else's parade. For the guild world, it was a starting gun, because if cities were achievable, then every major guild was suddenly, catastrophically, behind one rival, and recruitment wars ignited that same evening. And for a very small audience, the world's NPC powers, it was something else entirely, the moment the strange, deathless visitors stopped being tourists and became, in the language of every chancery on the continent, a faction. I know for a fact that 3 kingdoms opened files on player organizations that week, because I would eventually read 2 of the files, and both of them, in their preliminary threat assessments, misspelled Blaze's name and footnoted mine with the annotation, unaffiliated, motives unclear, monitor. And Blaze stood in the cheering and looked across the water at me with an expression I was seeing more and more, the look of a man rereading every lucky coincidence of the past month and finding the same signature under all of them. Their guild president, I learned later, had started a private file with my name on it and one question: who plays like this on week 4? And I got one more prize from that battle nobody else could see. Walking the shallows afterward, my system quietly logged the whole engagement into my architecture class as siege data. Riverworks, barge platforms, shield geometry, and Creeder's pen warmed in my pack, digesting the battle into future blueprints. That's the loop nobody had figured out yet about my class. Every war I win becomes a building I can raise. The victory feast in Iwara that night was held in the village square, with the burn marks still on the eastern fences, and it taught me what these border people are made of. They didn't toast the victory, they toasted the fences, individually. Raised cups to the east fence for holding, to the well for not fouling, to Arthur's old sword for coming off the wall one more time, a whole liturgy of small, stubborn objects. And last, without any signal I saw, the whole square turned and raised cups toward the front line, west, and drank in silence, and sat down and resumed the noise as if the silence hadn't happened. Border liturgy. You toast what held, you salute what's still out there holding, and you do not discuss the arithmetic between the two. The tower fights with mages, and the hells fight with mass, and I fight with everything I have ever survived, filed, annotated, and waiting in a sketchbook. A reborn man, Mr. President. Keep the file. It'll be worth something. Iwara stood, and in a hall of fire very far south, though I wouldn't confirm this scene for months, Malicor's death notice reached his superiors, and Hell's reaction was Hell in miniature. No mourning, obviously. A dispute over his equipment allocation, resolved by seniority and one small stabbing. And then, a single line of actual professional interest from the strategist who reviewed the battle logs, who noted that the human resistance at Iwara had employed prepared water terrain works of a type not seen in this war, and queried, in the margin, one word. Who? The query went into Hell's files, unanswered, patient, and Hell's files, unlike the towers, do not lose things. Harper's mother, Ilara, actually smiled at me for the first time, which from that gray, worn-down woman hit harder than the guild announcements. The protection quest stamped complete. And I went home and climbed a different kind of tower, a trial called the Wisdom Stone, which tests heroes on puzzles and waves of enemies, and which I converted into a private tower defense festival, riding it to wave 50, where a four-armed Naga boss with a whole deck of ability cards ran into my doll factory and lost the card game of her life. The stone ranked me 678th among all heroes of the age, which sounds humble until you read the list and realize everyone above me was a named legend, and I was the only entry with the word player next to it. Wave 50 itself, one footnote. The Naga arrived with a deck of ability cards, actual cards, drawn and played each round, and my counter after the third draw was to start reading her deck's rhythm out loud, calling her card before she flipped it, which did nothing mechanical whatsoever and everything psychological. By wave's end, she was hesitating on her own draws, second-guessing a randomizer, which I didn't know was possible for a trial construct. And when the dolls finally reached her, she conceded with what I swear was professional respect, one gambler to another. The stone marked my run with a commendation for unorthodox methods, which is going on my tombstone. The card comedy peaked in the middle waves, when the Trials deck system and my Apostle of Fate deck met for the first time and were, apparently, compatible, which no one had planned for, least of all the Trial. My Fate card that round was a humble resource card, and the Naga's was some tactical horror. And when the two decks synced, the interface produced a genuine dueling arena presentation, floating cards, dramatic reveals, a summoning glow on my side that resolved, after maximum ceremony, into 12 units of lumber. 12 lumber, revealed like a forbidden dragon. The Naga stared. I stared. Somewhere the Trial's ancient machinery had clearly mixed up its genres, and I did the only correct thing, which was to slam the lumber down with full theatrical conviction and shout that its effect activated on draw. The Trial, bless its confused heart, paused to check, and that pause cost the Naga her tempo and me my last shred of dignity, and only one of us needed what we lost. Home kept growing while I climbed. In the Watermills library, of all places, I found a book that reached back. A treatise on mill fairies, written with love and fury by an author named Lyra, a legendary hero of the Tower who had rebelled against what her faction does to fairies and been imprisoned for it. The book's margins held her voice like a message in a bottle, and the system heard it too, and posted a demigod-grade quest with her name on it. Rescue Lyra. Another cell to open in the tower's basement, another name on my long invoice. Filed, and lit a candle on it. I read her whole book that night, cover to cover, and I want to quote the line that recruited me, written by a tower legend about the mill fairies her own faction rents out like tools. She wrote, "They sing at the wheel not because the work is bearable, but because the song is the one thing produced at this mill that the ledger cannot enter." A hero of the tower wrote that, and the tower put her in a cell for the opinions attached to it. 36 heroes, the margins hinted, had already died in attempts to free her over the years. The quest board now said I was invited to be the 37th attempt. Statistically ominous. Personally, I've never read better odds, because none of the 36 had my sketchbook, and Cell's, colleagues, our architecture. And Celestine, the tween mushrooms, casually revealed her professional function. She could sing. The lucky song, once a week, a blessing of luck and morale over my whole territory, and she performed it from the mill roof like a diva doing a stadium encore, and my fairies held up glowing mushrooms like lighters. The first full performance had a moment I didn't tell anyone about for a long time. Mid-song, the luck came down visibly, a shimmer settling over the territory like the air after summer rain. And through the bracelet on my wrist I felt, distinctly, a second presence lean in to listen, vast and warm and off-duty, the way you'd lean into a doorway of a kitchen where someone is singing. Just for the length of one verse. Then it withdrew, gently, before the applause, and Celestine, still mid-note, glanced at exactly the empty air where it had been and smirked without missing a beat. Her boss makes house calls. I run a territory where gods drop by for the music, and I have elected, on the whole, to be delighted rather than examined about it. My territory now had a national anthem performed by a mythical being paid in produce. Show me another startup with those benefits. The departure for the southern trip involved a ceremony, and the ceremony involved fraud, and I regret nothing. Here's the thing. The system grants a lasting morale bonus to expeditions that receive a proper heroic send-off, and the trigger conditions are documented nowhere but in my past life memory: crowd size, cheering volume, at least one banner, at least one tearful farewell. So I staged it. Elion organized the crowd with a seating chart. The fairies made banners with slogans workshopped by committee, the winning entry being "Come back rich" or "Come back anyway," which frankly belongs on currency. Celestine agreed to perform the tearful farewell and threw herself into the role with such theatrical devastation, wailing, wing drooping, a dramatic collapse onto a mushroom, that two fairies who knew it was staged started crying anyway, which pushed the crowd over some threshold. And the system, moved by our completely manufactured spontaneity, stamped the expedition with +2 morale for a week. Directing credit goes to me. Acting honors to the mushroom section. Then we went south because I had a shopping list only a dungeon city could fill, and the trip needed a boat. About the boat. During a night defense of my territory, repelling an undead invasion that came at us across the water, Tier 1 to Tier 7, 5 bone dragons deep, commanded by a bone dragon hero, I'd done unspeakable things with terrain. Gale arrows shoving skeleton regiments off the pier into the sea, where skeletons perform famously. Ice armor cast on ghosts to give the weightless things weight, then introducing them to gravity over deep water. A dread knight walked on a leash of kiting archers until its dignity drowned before it did. And when the enemy hero brought his reinforcements across the flats, I'd already read the tide tables, and the sea repossessed him on schedule. The loot from that unhinged night included the prize of the season, a 100-meter elven carrier, ancient, elegant, asleep, with a dormant ship spirit in its keel, the Silver Spirit. We sailed her south with my whole crew aboard, and the Silver Spirit tour alone was worth the trip, magic runes down her flanks, a speed stat that embarrassed warships. And somewhere in her hold, a sleeping something that ate every spare part we fed her and grew a fraction warmer each day. On the way, a pod of ice horn whales crossed our bow with sea serpents on their tail, dark patterned ones, hunting a calf. We intervened, obviously. The Poseidon cannon on our deck turns out to launch sea serpents vertically, which was news to the serpents, and the calf's parents circled our ship afterward in slow thanks. The calf, who I named Grumpy for reasons that were obvious if you heard him, followed us for a day like a very large opinion. He would, months later, turn up in my finished harbor unannounced, twice his size, honking at the breakwater until the harbor ferries fetched me, and the ice horn whales would quietly add my bay to their migration route, which no charted route had included in living memory. My fishermen would learn that no sea predator follows a horn whale pod into a harbor, ever, meaning my city acquired, for the price of one rescue and a silly name, a seasonal navy of benevolent icebergs. File under kindness compounds. My whole economy is built on that interest rate. The serpent fight had one moment I want kept. Dark patterned sea serpents hunt as a wolf pack of the water, and while our cannon handled the flankers, the pack leader got under the calf for the killing rush from below. The angle whales can't watch. The Silver Spirit, unasked, on nobody's order, turned herself. Whatever slept in her keel took the helm for 3 seconds, put her hull between the strike and the calf, and rang like a struck bell, and the serpent bounced. My whole crew stared at the wheel, which had moved on its own, and then down at the deck. I put my palm flat on the planking and felt, unmistakably underneath the wood, something the size of a heartbeat being smug. We also dipped into the Sea of Magic proper, the 3rd floor of it, where the water is dissolved spellwork, and I owe you the view. Because the 3rd floor of that sea is the single most beautiful place I've been in 2 lives. The water goes violet gold and translucent for miles down, and old spells drift in it like weather, a fossilized blizzard turning slowly at 40 fathoms, a school of some ancient archmage's messenger lights still swimming their route 4 centuries after the message mattered. And where our hull passed, the water reacted to the Silver Spirit like water remembering a name, parting a touch early, closing a touch late, respectful. Shenza stood at the rail doing sums out of pure habit and finally gave up and just looked, which for him is a religious experience, and held a fishing contest. I, the man with maxed luck, caught nothing for an hour while Shenza pulled up a golden trout on his first cast, because the universe keeps its own comedy schedule. My eventual catch was a Yuanchuan sea cucumber, which every guide calls trash, and which I released. And I'll note for the record that the hour of boots and kelp had a suspicious shape to it, because the bracelet on my wrist, whose hidden skill had guaranteed my catches at the magic well all those weeks ago, stayed cold that whole hour, and warmed only once at the exact cast that brought up the cucumber. My equipment was curating. Somewhere between a girl's handmade wire and a goddess's sense of theater, my fishing line had developed editorial standards, because I remembered what the guides never learned. Released, it sings. And it sang, and the sea answered with a rain of fish carrying 777,000 gold in swallowed treasure. Spell scrolls, skill points, the works. The crew stood on deck in a hurricane of falling wealth, holding buckets, screaming financial advice at each other. The accounting afterward took a full day and revealed the rain had been weirdly personal, and I mean addressed. The spell scrolls that fell matched gaps in my roster's abilities almost line by line. The skill points came sized to push Xiao Li over a class threshold he'd been grinding toward. One fish, I am not inventing this, contained a wrench, high grade, artificer's quality, exactly the model Harper had mentioned wanting in a voice message 2 weeks earlier. And when I mailed it to her, she replied with a list of questions about my fish that I could not begin to answer. The sea cucumber's gratitude, Shenze concluded, reading the manifest with a merchant's reverence, itemizes. Highest praise he knows. In the interest of honest journalism, the contest hour went as follows. 1 hour. The man with maxed luck, blessed by the goddess of fortune herself, wearing a harp that bends probability, caught the following: 1 boot, 1 different boot, a fish that fled with my hook in a way the system logged as a robbery, and a piece of kelp shaped, several witnesses agreed, like my face. Meanwhile, Shenze, serene, first cast, golden trout the size of his whole body, which he apologized for. Apologized. Said the fish probably just recognized a fellow merchant. My own patron goddess, I am certain, was watching my bobber do nothing for an hour and biting her knuckle to keep from laughing. Because when I finally hooked the worthless rated sea cucumber, my luck stat visibly triggered. On that, the trash catch, which is how I knew, before the guides could have told me, that the trash was the ticket. Her sense of humor has a structure to it. The joke is never that you lose. The joke is the prize wearing a disguise. Then the water went black, and the singing stopped, and something with a title surfaced. A Chaos Devourer, a Chaos General, far from any invasion date on my calendar, which meant the calendar was wrong, which meant my whole rebirth advantage had an expiry date I couldn't see. We fought it at the scale we had, a giant tree anchor and shield walls, and killed its vanguard of 135, and then its main body rose, and we were exactly as doomed as arithmetic suggested. And an old man walked out onto the water, the shabby priest, Torvin, the retired heavyweight from the village temple, strolling across the waves like a man crossing his kitchen floor. He looked at the Chaos Hydra head rearing over my ship, and he hit it once. The horizon rippled. The general's head went away, and the rest of it followed. And the sea remembered how to be blue, though before it did, the system stamped the encounter into my log with a quest whose grade I'd learned to respect, demigod tier, tracking one question the fight had opened and nobody aboard could close. Why a Chaos General, an invasion class entity, was awake and scouting open water 3 years ahead of every schedule in my memory. My rewind had bought me a map of the future. The map had just moved under my feet, a whole continent of certainty turning into weather. And I stood on the deck while the crew cheered the rescue and privately re-rated every plan I owned from guaranteed down to probably, which is the honest rating, and always was. And Torvin turned to me with the paperwork already glowing in his hand, because of course the punch was also a delivery route. He was no priest and no mere legend, a demigod, an envoy of the magic faith, and his cheap village blessing racket had been a filter for finding one specific kind of person. His package held a carved serpent sternpiece for my ship and a job scroll, Golden Summoner, addressed to Shen Ze by name, with the compliments of the goddesses. The Pantheon was staffing my company now. Shen Ze's reaction to the scroll completed the scene. He read the class name, Golden Summoner, and the description, which I'll compress, a commander class that conjures value, materializing gold-wrought soldiers whose strength scales with wealth honestly earned. And this small person who had spent his life giving money away stood on my deck holding the one class in existence that weaponizes a lifetime of fair dealing. And asked me, genuinely bewildered, but why me? The entire ship answered at once. Even the serpent surfaced to answer. He did the class trial that evening, and his first golden soldier materialized, already bowing to him, which the goddesses, I am confident, choreographed, and which none of us have let him live down. I'd complain about the oversight, but the benefits were becoming ridiculous, and the punch had been extremely convincing. What stayed with me from that afternoon wasn't the punch, though the punch has its own wing in my memory palace. It was the talk after. Torvin sat on our rail with his feet hanging over the healing sea like a farmer at a pond, and asked me, conversationally, why I fought so hard for things that weren't mine: fairies, whales, other people's daughters, other people's futures. Trick question, from a demigod of a faith built on truth. I gave him the honest answer before I could stop myself, which is that I've already seen how this world ends when everyone only guards their own, and he looked at me sideways for a long moment, one eyebrow up, and did not ask the obvious follow-up. That was the moment I understood the goddesses had probably briefed him, and the moment he understood that I understood, and we both watched the water and said nothing. Two professionals respecting the size of each other's paperwork. One more sea fight on the approach. A mermaid queen with a grudge and a hurricane, settled by an advanced blindness curse and one lucky boulder from a stone-throwing sprite that connected like a judgment from above. Her hoard held a second crown of mythical beasts, a component I needed for a robe I was assembling, and in the harbor afterward, sketching the dock with Creeder's ruler, the inspiration lightning struck again. The pen ran away with my hand, and out came a wonder-grade design called the Neptune Great Shipyard, which grows living warships from Sea King turtles, hulls that heal, decks that grow. And a footnote saying the flagship class eventually matures into a mobile city, a shipyard that grows city ships, in my sketchbook. 14 sea monsters gathered outside the harbor just from the blueprint's aura, like cats outside a fish market. And we left port at full speed, with the whole squadron following us in respectful formation, while my crew waved goodbye, and I held the drawing above my head and screamed, "Not for sale." The Queen's fight, one beat of it, belongs in the record. She'd wrapped the sea itself around us, hurricane walls, and my counterspells were losing the exchange. The blindness curse only landed because Xiao Li had spent the whole battle tracking her incantation cadence, and called the quarter second her guard dropped between verses. That's twice in this story his rhythm reading has saved a fight. Note it, the quiet ones keep the metronome. And when her hurricane collapsed and the lucky boulder finished the argument, she surrendered with royal grace, ransomed herself with the crown from her hoard, and asked, before diving, who taught a land creature to hear the sea's timing? I pointed at a seasick teenager gripping the rail. She looked at Xiao Li, bowed her head one queenly inch, and the sea took her home, and Xiao Li has never once stopped mentioning it. The complaints department also filed their report on that engagement, since they'd opened the fight by slapping a mermaid monarch across her hurricane. And the report read, in full, "She was slow for a queen, boss, then she was slower. And honestly, no bard on this continent will ever write naval history with that economy of style. Potato City announced itself from an hour out, the way dungeon cities do, a mountain with doors, torchlit terraces going down instead of up, and a customs culture best described as armed skepticism. Inside, the dungeon faction ran on a currency older than gold, which is leverage. Slaves on the block, contracts with teeth, Medusa clerks who notarize documents by looking at you. My kind of negotiating environment in the sense that a shark recognizes water. The gate guards wanted to impound my ship. I recited 3 clauses of dungeon commercial law at them from memory, 2 of which were real, and 1 of which I invented in the same confident tone, and we were through before anyone checked the 3rd. The invented clause, for connoisseurs, was the statute of reciprocal moorage, which I delivered with a citation number and the weary tone of a man who has litigated it twice. The gate captain, a scarred minotaur with a clipboard, wrote it down. Wrote it down. Somewhere in Potato City's customs law, if bureaucracy works there the way it works everywhere, my fictional statute is now precedent, cited by clerks, feared by captains, and historians should know I'm sorry and also that I'm not. The city's merchant princes had already heard of the Silver Spirit, and a cameo delegation from the Shadowgate Syndicate came to gawk at her hull and left speechless, which in Potato City counts as a formal compliment. My business was with a dark elf merchant queen named Lilithia, and the negotiation was the best duel I fought all season. No swords, tea. She wanted my dream mushrooms, which only grow where Celestine gardens, and she opened with a colonizer's smile and a lowball offer wrapped in flattery. I wanted her potato mountains, 4.5 million units of them, cheap carbohydrates for a fairy nation, plus member pricing on her routes. We went 12 rounds. She tried exclusivity clauses. I tried tragic backstories. She deployed wine. I deployed Kalen, who chose that moment to arrive in full master's regalia with an honor guard of Medusa maids, red carpet unrolling, my teacher waving like visiting royalty, and Lilithia's eyebrows finally conceded the match. I owe the record a fuller picture of my teacher's entrance, because it was the single most expensive 30 seconds of theater I've ever commissioned for free. The doors opened. 2 files of Medusa maids entered, veiled, immaculate, unrolling actual red carpet in synchronized flicks. And behind them came Kalen in his full master's regalia, robes I had never seen, orders and medallions I suspected were partly invented, moving at the exact pace of a man who has never once hurried for commerce. He crossed the hall without looking at anyone, kissed Lilithia's hand, pronounced her establishment nearly adequate, and took the seat beside me as if it had been reserved since the founding of the city. The negotiation resumed at new prices. Nobody acknowledged the carpet. In the dungeon markets, I learned that day, an argument can be won by upholstery, and my teacher, the recluse, the hermit, turns out to keep a full diplomatic wardrobe for precisely these occasions, folded, ready, and terrifying. 30-70 split in my favor, member prices, potatoes flowing north by the shipload. Round 9 of the 12, here's the transcript. Lilithia, wearing the smile queens wear at chess, slid the exclusivity clause across the table for the 3rd time, reworded, perfumed, and buried in subsection 4, my mushrooms sold to her house alone, forever. I slid it back unread and asked her instead how her house's greenhouses were doing, generally, as a topic, and watched 1/8 of one muscle move near her left eye, which in dark elf negotiation is a scream. She knew I knew she'd fail to grow them. I knew she knew renewal was her only road. Neither of us said any of it, because saying it would have collapsed the beautiful pretense that we were equals rather than a supplier and an addict. And the rest of the table thought we were discussing horticulture. We were, the way duelists discuss footing. She also, my magic eye noted on the way out, quietly pocketed a dream mushroom to attempt cultivation, which I'd priced into the deal from the start. Grow them, madam, please. Spend a fortune trying. Only Celestine's green thumb makes them sprout, and every failed greenhouse you build is another year you'll renew my contract. Some traps you don't spring. You lease them. Seraphina, since the trip's original errand shouldn't vanish in the potato arithmetic, I did find, on the last evening, exactly where my past life said she'd be, carrying wine through a noble hall with her eyes down and a bloodline asleep in her that could flatten the building. Getting a private word took 3 bribes and 1 borrowed servant coat, and I didn't lead with the certificate, or destiny, or any of my usual brochure. I asked her one question, whether she'd ever wondered why storms calmed when she was angry, and watched a lifetime of carefully suppressed maybe come up in her face like a tide. I left her my token and the words, "When you're ready, there's a city being built where nobody carries wine with their eyes down." Recruitment isn't always a contract on the spot. Sometimes it's a door you install and leave unlocked. Potatoes secured, crew loaded, one more piece of business waited before home, and it was the big one. Kalen had cleared me for my second echoes of history, and this time the dead who took me were not centaurs. I woke up as a snow elf in a city I knew from nightmares of paperwork. De City. Morley's era, at the height of the tower's fairy industry, and the echo had cast me into the middle of the event fairy mothers still whisper about, the De City escape. Around me, the cast assembled by history itself. A herbalist named Lan Hua, a gentle strongman called Luo Shan, a young guard fairy with borrowed spectacles and a clipboard, and I looked at him twice and my chest went sideways because I knew that face. Elian. My Elian. A lifetime younger, already carrying everyone's problems in a little ledger. He didn't know me, of course, couldn't. To him, I was a strange snow elf who'd joined the column at the North Gate. But 10 minutes into the march, he'd already assigned me a place in his ledger, noted my rations, asked after my boots, and apologized for the pace. I walked beside this young, unbroken version of my administrator, this kid who hadn't yet learned to flinch when someone raised a hand. And I had to look away for a while at the scenery, which was a burning district and was easier, and leading them all, a fraud. A street prophet named Gao Tian Ming, a con artist who told fortunes for bread, and who had made the mistake of faking one prophecy so well it came true, and now had 10,000 fairies looking at him like a door out. I got to know the fraud on the march, and I want him understood, because history flattened him into either saint or charlatan, and he was the more interesting third thing. Gao Tianming read fortunes he invented, yes, but I watched what he invented, and every single fortune was load-bearing. To the widow, he prophesied her sons would need her strength next spring, so she ate. To the frightened wheel crews, he saw safe roads and full larders 2 towns over, so they walked. He was running hope logistics under the license of mysticism, a supply officer disguised as an oracle. And when I asked him privately, colleague to professional, whether he believed any of it, he polished his fake seer's medallion and said, "The trick, friend, is that if enough of them walk toward the good fortune, somebody has to build it when they arrive." Then he winked. Then he became a god for 3 seconds and died covering his customers. I have known archmages with less real magic in them. The first run, I played it straight, and I watched history happen the way it originally happened. The escape column made it to the canyon. The tower's hired knoll lancers were waiting, led by a tracker named Rorik with an eye like a bayonet. Luo Shan died holding the line with his arms open. Gao Tianming took a lance through the chest calling the formations. And then, surrounded, the fairies did the thing that broke me. They formed a wall of their own bodies around their children and started singing. Their song about the ideal village, the one my mill fairies still hum. And the echo showed me what that song did. Every micro-fairy in D City, every spark of fairy stuff in the walls and lamps and workshops tore loose and streamed to the canyon and poured into the dying fraud. And Gao Tianming stood up off the lance as something the system typed in gold. Tier 7. Mythic. The fairy great prophet, first and last of his name. He cursed a city stone by stone, and then he looked up past the clouds at the tower's true master. The fraud who became a prophet spent his last breath on a real prophecy at last. Thief of thunder, the day comes when you are dragged from your throne. I need you to understand what the moment before the lightning was like, because I've never seen anything hold that much weight since. 10,000 fairies in a canyon, singing through their own casualty list. A con man glowing gold, standing off a god with a borrowed miracle and a face that said even he couldn't believe his last fortune-telling was finally true. And overhead, the clouds turning that wrong color, the color of an authority deciding that an example must be made. Gao Tianming had time to spread his arms in front of his people. That's what a Tier 7 mythic being spent his 3 seconds of godhood on. Cover. The sky answered. The Thunder Titan answered personally, and lightning the width of a river fell on the canyon. And the run ended. All of them, everyone, the singers and the children, and young Elian with his ledger. The echo printed 2 words I'd never seen it print. Run failed. I sat in the white void between attempts for a long time. Then I cracked my knuckles and I ran it again. And the second time, history had an architect in it. The second time, the knoll ambush slept through the escape, and the chemistry behind that sentence cost me 2 nights and 1 singed eyebrow. Because Lanhua's herb satchel held the components for a proper sedative smoke but no proportions, the proportions having died with her teacher. So I reverse engineered them by trial over a shielded brazier while the herbalist watched this strange snow elf mutter about diffusion rates in no language she knew. The final blend burned slow, rode the valley's night wind for a mile, and smelled, she said, like rain on warm stone, which is why no sentry flagged it. An ambush doesn't fail loudly when it fails this way, it just oversleeps, gently, all of it, because a snow elf with a suspicious knowledge of chemistry had spent 2 nights upwind of their camp, burning herbs Lanhua gathered to my exact recipe. The tracker Rorik woke up alone and met the business end of organized centaur archery I'd trained from the militia. Morley, the refinery man, intersected the escape route on schedule with his collection wagons, and I broke my own no detours rule and let a death fairy named Silas, whose family was in those wagons once, do the honors slowly. I stood witness while he did, because if you authorize a thing you stand where you can see it. Silas was old for a fairy, colorless the way death fairies are, a veteran of the wheel and the vat both, and he didn't rage. He asked Morley questions. Quiet bookkeeping questions, names, dates, wagon numbers, and the refinery man answered because the alternative kept being explained to him. And with every answer, another fairy in our column heard, at last, what had actually happened to someone they'd stopped hoping about. It took an hour. It was testimony, not torment, and when the ledger of it was full, Silas closed his little book, looked up, and said the sentence I think about most from either echo. He said, "You counted us your whole life. Now you've been counted." And that was that, and history's oldest debt in that canyon changed hands. The column made the coast. I'd pre-built the whirlpool ships to my own designs. 10,000 fairies and change went up the gangplanks. And Gao Tianming, alive, unmartyred, still technically a fraud, stood on the flagship rail conducting the war song with both arms as the city shrank behind us. The echo rolled credits on the words, "Main Quest Success." The second run had cost me things the summary hides. 11 days inside, compressed. 2 near misses where my foreknowledge went stale because I'd already changed too much and history stopped matching my notes. And I had to improvise like any mortal. Swath after months of playing prophet felt like walking on ice in the dark. And one conversation I didn't plan, the night before the coast, when young Elian sat down across my fire, studied me with those bent spectacles, and said, quietly, "You knew the canyon was wrong before the scouts did. You knew the wagon schedule, and you knew my name." I prepared a lie. He watched me prepare it, and then he said, "Whoever sent you, when you go back to them, tell them the fairies say thank you," and went to bed. And left me sitting there, outmaneuvered in intelligence matters by a teenage accountant, an experience I would go on to repeat in the present day approximately weekly. The dead paid like an empire. 13 fairy buildings, the troop lines of Bard, Prophet, and Great Prophet, a wonder called the Fairy Trio Cabin, and one item that stopped my heart, a fragment, one shard of a blueprint stamped Mythic, and the name on it was the name from the song, the Fairy Ideal Village. The system was telling me the ideal village is a real building, buildable by me, and history had just handed me the first piece. Outside the echo, the aftershocks were their own comedy. Kalen, as my sponsoring master, received reward feedback from my run that maxed out his proficiencies and showed him for the first time in his long life a glimpse of the path to legendary. And the old man responded by gifting me 400 energy potions and technique scrolls with the fervor of a man tipping the winning horse. His loyalty pane, if teachers had one, read somewhere north of air. The Recruit Kalen quest that popped that evening was, frankly, a formality. Home then. And on to the real project, because my sketchbook was full, my vault was full, my nation of fairies was overflowing a refugee camp built for 50. The city building order had been burning a hole in my inventory for weeks. Time to found the city. One snapshot from the eviction week before the founding. 7 days, 11 nests, my whole roster working in shifts, and by day 4 the local monsters had understood something was happening and begun, I am convinced, communicating about us, because the last few dens we approached were already packed. Not fled, packed, belongings gathered, young ones herded, whole colonies relocating east with the resigned efficiency of tenants who have seen the new landlord's paperwork. My archers found one abandoned den swept clean with a fish left on a flat stone at the entrance, which the captain ruled was either an offering or a review, and we honored it as both and did not pursue. Even eviction, done loudly enough in advance, becomes negotiation. The War Council ran a full night. Maps on every table, my whole studio arguing dots and arrows, Shenze pricing supply lines, Elian projecting population curves with the quiet terror of a man who has counted his citizens twice. The site I chose made everyone squint first and nod slowly after. A river delta where the Nephthys meets the Golden Sea, backed by cliffs. 3 sides defended by geography, 1 by me. Fresh water, salt harbor, stone at our backs, and a neighborhood with exactly one drawback, which is that everything living nearby wanted us dead. The council fight over the site was won, in the end, by Elian of all people, when the debate stalled between my delta and Chen Wei's safer inland pick. He stood up on the map table, walked to the delta, planted his pencil stub on the river mouth like a flag, and delivered the shortest strategic argument in company history. Inland, he said, we would be safe, and we would be small, and fairies have been safe and small for 300 years, and he pushed his cracked spectacles up and sat down. Chen Wei looked at the pencil stub for a moment, then quietly moved his own marker to the delta, and that was the vote. So we pre-cleared. A week of eviction notices served at arrow point to every Tier 5 nest in the delta, capped by an undead shepherd, a lich rancher herding a corpse flock across my future harbor district. For him, I built a rock bridge across the river, let his herd commit to the crossing, and demolished my own bridge at the midpoint, and what the river started, a rented tornado finished. His pastures dropped a Black Serpent Den war blueprint, and his absence dropped the neighborhood crime rate to 0. The bridge trick works best drawn on a napkin, so picture the napkin. The shepherd's corpse flock only had one way to reach my side of the water, and I'd built it for him, a lovely rock bridge, generous width, suspiciously convenient placement. The lich, whose kind consider living tacticians beneath study, marched 2/3 of his herd onto my gift before the toll came due. Architects don't just build, we unbuild, and unbuilding is faster. The middle span dropped like a coin into a well, the herd went with it, and the water did to the walking dead what water always does, no drama, just subtraction. His rear guard I swept off the banks with a rented tornado scroll, which is a real product, sold by a wind shrine, with a warranty card I did not read until after, at which point I learned the warranty is void if used against shepherds. Any shepherds. There's a story behind that clause, and I have chosen not to learn it. And that same night, in the harbor, the Silver Spirit finally finished digesting every part and rune we'd fed her for a month, and the keel lit up from bow to stern, and the sleeping ship spirit waved up. She came up through the deck like a sunrise, and the hour before her was the strangest watch of my life, because ships are not supposed to have moods, and ours was visibly gathering one. The runes along the hull lit in sequence, bow to stern and back, faster each cycle, like something pacing. The mermaid figurehead turned its face, which figureheads should not, toward the harbor lights. Every rope on deck went taut and slack, in a slow rhythm I eventually recognized, with the hair standing up on my arms, as breathing practice. And Shenzi, standing beside me with his ledger clutched to his chest, whispered the only appropriate words, which were, "Sir, I believe the ship is nervous." I put my hand on the mast and said, out loud, feeling absurd and meaning it completely, "Take your time, we're not going anywhere," and the breathing steadied. Then a silver flower fairy the height of my knee rubbed her eyes, looked around at the assembled crew of hardened veterans, pointed at me, and said, "Captain, Dad." The crew lost it. I gained a daughter, apparently, name of Nova, appetite of a shipyard, guarded by the Tier 5 elemental sea emperor serpent that had grown in the hold alongside her, and possessed of the firm belief that tactics lessons from me were bedtime stories. I taught her levels and tiers off a slate on the quarterdeck, while she grew sen moss and glowing ferns out of the deck planks as a side effect of existing. My flagship was now a living garden with opinions and a grandfather serpent. The goddess of peace, Celestine mentioned in passing, approves of her especially. Fine, add a 5th goddess to the snow globe. At this point I was considering a guest book. The tactics lessons with Nova became the best hour of my days, without my noticing the transition. She'd sit on the capstan with her chin on her fists, while I chalked unit diagrams on the quarterdeck, and she asked the questions children ask, which are the questions philosophers charge for. Why do the little numbers fight for the big numbers? Why is a tier different from a level? And I gave her the manual answer. Tier is what you are, level is how far you've walked. And she thought about that with her whole face and said, "So Uncle Shenzi was always Tier 6, he just needed the walking." I put the chalk down and sat with that for a minute, because she just explained my entire nation-building philosophy back to me better than I'd ever phrased it. Everything on my payroll, fairy, centaur, ship, man, was always the thing it is. My whole job, the entire architect class, every blueprint and ledger and scheme is just building people the road. One landmark overlooked my chosen delta, and I'd been saving it for last, on purpose. A red tower on the coastal ridge, marked on maps as the Redwood Lookout Tower, catalogued by every guide as scenery. I knew better. The Redwood Lookout is a door. Behind its shabby lookout platform hides the base of the Tower of Elements, the pillar the elemental gods themselves once climbed, and befriending it meant my future city would sit in the shade of the oldest structure on the continent. The door had a doorkeeper, a girl made of moving air, a breeze elemental, leaning on the rail like bored front desk staff. Elementals respond to charm and chatter, so I deployed my finest material. And she laughed at exactly the right places with exactly the wrong eyes. I have to reconstruct the crime scene honestly, because I walked into it like a man inspecting his own trap from the inside. She'd asked leading questions, and I'd led. She'd admired my cloak, and I'd narrated its provenance with, in retrospect, the exact cadence of a peacock reading its resume. At one point, and my centaur captain has sworn to carry this to his grave, which means the entire territory knew by dinner, I compared her to a fair wind before a good harvest, a line I'd workshopped on the ride up. And about 10 compliments in, I felt the temperature of the conversation drop out of the bottom of the world. She said her name, Shui Hua, and the wind on the whole ridge went still, and my system pinged with a stack of notifications I read with my soul leaving through my ears. I'm preserving the conversation before the reveal as evidence for my eventual trial. She'd asked about my travels, and I delivered the polished anecdotes. She'd asked about my plans, and I gestured at the Delta with proprietary confidence. She'd asked, with a small wind smile, whether the famous founder of the coming city found the tower's guard post boring. And I said, I quote myself with the courage of the condemned, that no view with her in it could be called boring. And she laughed a laugh I now recognize as the sound of a cat filing paperwork on a mouse, and the entire time, her father's attention was resting on the ridge like an unexploded climate. Daughter of the air elemental monarch, of you wind, a true god, one of the 4 pillars of the world, and I'd just spent 10 minutes practicing pickup lines on his child. And the follow-up notification confirmed that the monarch himself was now following my activities, with a favorability score that started below 0 and had opinions about going lower. A true god. Following me, like the worst social media outcome imaginable, and under it, a timed quest in god-tier trim, meet her again, 35 hours, at the top of whatever this tower would ask of me. The girl smiled the smile of someone whose father has never once been a problem she couldn't enjoy, and the door opened, and the Redwood trial swallowed me. The trial, I swear on my pen, was a board game. The elemental races settle worthiness through something called Simulated Heroes, a dice and tiles match played on a living map, part strategy, part property empire, part knife fight in a toy box. Floor 1 seated me opposite a gust elemental who played conservative and got dismantled by aggressive card economy, a phrase I used to disguise the fact that fate dealt me a doomsday card on turn 3 and I slapped it down on his best property like rent coming due. Floor 2 brought a lightning elemental with dice tricks and a temper, and I won that one on mount advantage, having drafted a Medusa bishop piece that petrified his token every time our paths crossed, which the rules allowed, and his composure did not survive. Floor 3 played long and mean against a cloud elemental with a defensive engine I couldn't crack for an hour, until the trial's own prize vault offered its mid-game draft, and I assembled the Titan arrow set piece by piece across 4 turns in open view while he calculated odds. The moment the last component clicked, his engine and his composure resolved simultaneously. 3 floors, 3 schools of victory, luck, preparation, and patience. And if you think it's beneath a war memoir to be proud of board game results, the stakes on that board were my city's future neighbors, and I'd play it again tonight. The trial's quartermaster now, because the Redwood keeps a supply post between floors, staffed by an elemental clerk whose job for several centuries has been managing equipment no one ever buys. I bought everything. I want to be clear about the scene. I went down his scrapped inventory list, the dented logistics gear, the obsolete fairy tools, the retired training sets, 5 full sets of Tier 4 equipment written off before my grandfather was born. And I said, all of it. Quote me for all of it. This ancient being looked at me with the expression of a museum guard being asked to gift wrap the museum. And then a slow, terrible, beautiful hope entered his airy features, and he began, for the first time in recorded history, to upsell. He upsold me for an hour. I let him. He threw in a discount he invented on the spot and a loyalty program with 1 member. And when I left, laden like a caravan, he stood at his counter straightening stock that had not moved in 300 years, whistling. Somewhere, there's a lesson about purpose in that. Also, the scrapped gear, refitted by Harper's hands later, outperformed new stock by a margin that made 2 blacksmiths quit, but mostly I think about the whistling. 3 floors of it I cleared that day, on card play and dice the goddess had already rigged with her jealousy, and along the way the trial's prize vault let me assemble a Titan arrow, and taught me something that cracked the lore of my past life wide open. A demigod blacksmith named O Falati, the vault said, can duplicate components of unique combination artifacts. Duplicate. Unique components. Those 2 words don't sit in the same law book. Every mortal enemy clause on every artifact set in this world, including my own Order Hammer subscription to Assassins, rests on the axiom that components are singular. If a hammer and forge god somewhere breaks that axiom for money, then somebody, someday, walks this continent with a second Order Hammer. and I put that thought in the vault next to the godhood research, on the shelf labeled problems that will absolutely reschedule themselves. The trial paid me a survey map of my entire Delta region, terrain, veins, hidden sites, the exact document an architect founds a city on. And the notification underneath mentioned casually that the trial continued upward, that floor 56 held a map of the world entire, and the summit held the audience chamber of the 4 elemental monarchs themselves. A map of the whole world at floor 56. Sit with what that's worth for a second, in a game where cartography is power, and the great guilds pay survey teams like armies. Somewhere up that red spine of stone, past 52 more floors of dice and knives, hangs the single most valuable document in existence. And past it, a room where the 4 beings who hold up reality receive guests, one of whom, currently, was disposed to receive me the way a storm receives a kite. 35 hours, said the other timer, next to a wind girl's smile and her father's glare. I looked up the tower's red flank, all the way to where it went theoretical in the clouds, and made the executive decision of a man with a city to found and a god already unhappy with him. Later. The tower wasn't going anywhere, and if the monarch wanted to watch me, let him watch what I do best. The girl herself saw me off from the tower door, and her parting line is the reason the timer haunts me. She said, entirely pleasant, entirely windless, "Most visitors climb for the prize, you're the first to leave for one." And then, as the door swung, quieter, in a voice with no performance left in it at all, "Build it well, founder. I'll be watching from the top." 35 hours, said the quest clock. A god's daughter, said the sky over the ridge, does not enjoy being rescheduled. I rode down the switchbacks, composing apologies in wind-appropriate meter, and stopped at the bottom. Because from the Delta floor, you can see the whole tower at once. And at the very top, where the red stone goes into cloud, something small and bright was leaning on a rail, looking down. I'd learn much later what the watching actually looked like from the other end, and since this is a full accounting, here's the scene as it was eventually described to me. High above the world, at his post on the pillar of heaven, the air elemental monarch, a being of storm the size of a weather system, one of the 4 load-bearing gods of reality, was spending measurable divine attention monitoring one half-elf with a sketchbook, and providing live commentary to his household. Look at him, ambient thunder. Now he's building a road. Who taught him to flatter? Where is that boy's supervision? His wife, by all reports, found the whole broadcast wonderful and encouraged it daily. His daughter pretended not to listen and adjusted her hair when my name came up. A true god of the primal wind, reduced to a father at a window, and every report agrees on the key detail. He never once looked away. Because it was time. Everything in this story so far, every blueprint, every fairy, every coin and scale and scheme funneled into the next 3 days. And I want to walk you through them slowly, the way I still walk through them at night. Day 1. The ground. 5 city building orders came out of 5 inventories, mine and my studio's, and slammed into the Delta Earth like the corners of a promise. The system offered each of us a separate small settlement, and all 4 of my people, unprompted, chose instead to merge their orders into mine. 1 city, 5 founders, my name on the deed. Wangbo said, with atypical quiet, "Build the big one, boss. We'll hold the walls." The merged foundation glowed and asked for a scale of ambition, and I scrolled past village, past town, past every reasonable option, to the entry with the longest requirements list, and my pixie architects cracked their tiny knuckles. Then I did the part I was born for. God view, open. The whole delta below me like a sand table. Roads first, the arteries, laid in curves that followed the water instead of fighting it. Districts blocked out by wind and light. Ferry quarters upwind of the workshops. The harbor cupped in the river's own arm. Walls set on the cliff shoulders where geography was already 90% of a fortress. Every dead architect in the echoes had left fingerprints on me, and I spent them all. Kalen arrived on the second morning, unannounced, with 200,000 gold in a chest and a train of level 2 resources. And when I started to refuse, my teacher looked at me over the rims of his glasses and said, "Students build, masters invest, shut up and take it." And stood there all day, watching the roads go down with his hands behind his back and his beard trembling. The build itself ran on a rhythm I'll hear for the rest of my life. Pixie architects don't hammer, they sing pitch into materials, and stone set to their chorus cures overnight into something masons can't explain. The centaurs hauled by day and patrolled by night and developed fierce district loyalties. My archer captain claimed the cliff quarter for his line before the cliff quarter had streets. The dream fairies blessed every foundation, uninvited, at dawn, which meant every building in my city technically opened lucky. Shenze's caravans ran a loop so tight the drivers waved at each other from opposite banks. Nova sailed the Silver Spirit up and down the harbor line, supervising loudly. And Celestine sat on the highest scaffold, eating commemorative mushrooms, one per completed structure, a system of civic recognition she'd invented and administered entirely herself, and which the fairies took more seriously than any official ribbon. And on the fourth day, before any palace, before my own quarters even had a roof, we built the hill. The line item that survived every budget review. A green rise above the loon with room, and up from the old refinery grounds, carried the whole way by volunteer relay because Elian refused to put them on carts, came the buried statues, reinterred beneath planted willows, with each name we'd recovered cut into riverstone. The fairies hold a quiet hour there on rest days now. No ceremony, no speeches, just small people sitting with their history in the grass of a city where it can't happen again. And when the wind comes up the loon and moves the willows, my citizens say the hill is singing. I have never once corrected them, because I've stood there at dusk, and it is. The ferry water wheel went up on the Loon River, and my mill ferries, the original 100, the ones from a rented wheel a lifetime ago, hung flower ropes on it before the mortar dried. Day 2 belonged to the bones, walls, and harbor, and I ran both fronts at once from Godview like a man conducting 2 orchestras with 1 baton. The cliff shoulder walls went up in segments, each segment's foundation sung true by pixie chorus before the stone came down. And I placed the towers personally, not evenly, evenness is for decorators, but at the exact angles where my 5 years of siege memories said attacks actually come from. The harbor got the deep water berth first, sized, though I told no one yet, for a certain 100-meter carrier and her eventual sisters. Then the breakwater, laid along the current line the river itself showed me at dawn. Twice that day, I caught myself fixing problems from my past life, reinforcing the exact wall section that had failed me on my island in another timeline, doubling the exact gate that had burned. My city plan, an honest surveyor would note, is about 1/3 geography and 2/3 scar tissue. Shenze's caravan became a supply artery. Elian ran the whole site off 1 clipboard, promoted to deputy administrator of a construction zone the size of a legend, terrified and radiant. And on the naming debate, which lasted 1 entire dinner and nearly ended the studio, the short list included Langbo's suggestion of Bon Appetit, which I want on record so history knows what I saved us from. The name that won came from the quest that started everything, from a camp of refugees the gods kept choosing. God's chosen city. The dinner itself ran 3 hours and nearly required arbitration. Xiao Li proposed names with layered classical references that he then had to explain, which is naming committee suicide. Chen Wei proposed coordinates, actual coordinates, on grounds of unambiguity, and was voted off the naming committee unanimously, including, after consideration, by himself. Sunmei proposed Fluffington, campaigned for it with visual aids, and came genuinely closer to winning than history should admit. Elian, invited as the citizenry's delegate, stood on the table, unfolded a petition, and revealed that the fairies had already been calling the place something among themselves for weeks, in the songs, in the work chants, a name that translated as the city the gods kept choosing. The table went quiet, and Wang Bo, keeper of Bon Appetit, was the first to raise his cup and surrender. The districts got their names the same night, on momentum and wine. The cliff quarter went to my archer captain's line and is called Fang Line, their choice, after the fangs on their cords. The mill district named itself Wheelhome before we reached that agenda item. The fairies had already painted signs. The harbor is Nova's Landing, by acclamation and to the ship spirit's shrieking delight. And the little rise where the first campfire of the original mud pit had burned, before any of it, before everything, the committee voted unanimously to leave unnamed and unbuilt, 1 circle of bare ground in the middle of a rising city. So that, in Elian's official minutes, the city may always remember what it was given to start with, which was nothing, and company. Day 3. The Heart. A city in this world isn't real until it holds a sacred flame, a fire seed of Yasha, the mother goddess's pilot light, and the raising of the temple to house it is the founding act itself. I designed the great temple with Creeder's full toolkit, pen, ruler, gloves, and when I entered the build, the echoes took me one more time, gently now, like colleagues. I worked through the history of every temple ever raised on this continent, and somewhere in that white space the 5 fire seeds of 5 founders, mine and my 4 friends, flowed together into a single flame with 5 colors braided through it. Each seed came in carrying its owner, is the thing nobody warned me about. Chen Wei's burned a steady forest green, precise even as fire, and where it merged, the joint flame gained discipline, edges you could set a watch by. Wang Bo's was a shameless violet and crackled like laughter, and the merge gained warmth, of all things. The graveyard man's fire was the warm one, and if you know him, you know. Xiao Li's ran deep blue and quiet, and folded in like a theorem completing, and Sun Mei's was gold, obviously gold. And it didn't merge so much as arrive, luckily, at the exact right instant, in the exact right place, the way she does. 5 people's years of trust, rendered as physics, braiding on an altar I'd drawn. Sun Mei revealed, at the founding dinner afterward, that she had kept her original folder from the 1 in the morning meeting, the printed guide with my impossible homework in it, and she'd had it framed. The studio presented it to me for the city archive, with a little plaque that reads, Exhibit 1, The Alien's Homework, Do Not Audit. It hangs in the temple annex now, next to a painting I bought anonymously, and together they are the 2 most embarrassing, accurate documents in my nation. I have built larger things since. I have never built anything truer. The system had no template for that. I watched it improvise a new entry in real time. A 5-in-1 fire seed, a neutral city, the first ever founded by a player, ignited by a fused flame the world had never seen. Inside that final echo, the dead architects came to watch. I don't know how else to report it. The white space where I worked filled up, gradually, with presences at drafting tables that weren't there when I looked directly. Centaur builders from a river tribe, fairy craftsmen from a burned city, custodians from under a crystal mountain, the long staff roster of everyone whose history I'd walked through and carried out. And as I laid the temple's final lines, tools I hadn't reached for were finding my hand anyway, and corrections appeared in my line work in hands that were not mine, small ones, kind ones, a joint slightly eased here, a load path gentled there, a century of dead professionals leaning over the new hire's first cathedral and unable, constitutionally, to keep from helping. When the last line closed, something like applause happened that made no sound, and the 5 flames braided, and I stood there with wet eyes in an empty white room full of colleagues. When the temple's spire took the light, the beam went up through the clouds, and every player on the continent got the announcement at the same moment. Here is the plaza exactly as it was in that second, because I was facing it. My whole impossible census in 1 square. Centaur archers in parade files with wolf fangs on cords. 100 original mill fairies holding the pale, aloft like a regimental standard. Shenze and his 500, Elian front and center with a brand new pencil, full length, that I'd had made for the occasion and that he was visibly not intending to ever sharpen. Farmers, mercenaries, dream fairies, a bucket containing Chomper the piranha, raised by Sun Mei at the appropriate moment. Ember the griffin, visiting, fed, and over the harbor, riding the light of a 5-colored flame, a silver flower fairy doing loops around her own mast, screaming with joy in the register only ships and daughters reach. I stood in the plaza with my whole ridiculous family, fairies and centaurs and a saint, and a ship spirit shouting Captain Dad, and read the words with my ears roaring. Elian fainted, I should report, upright, respectfully, pencil in hand, and was caught by 4 guard fairies who had clearly pre-assigned themselves catching positions, which tells you what his people expected of the day. Shenze stood very still with his ledger hugged to his chest, moving his lips, and I realized he was reading the announcement over and over, the words, neutral city, founder, the way you reread a pardon. The world's first player city has been founded, God's chosen city, faction, neutral, founder, Liu Chuan. Then the second announcement landed, the one even I didn't expect, and the forums did not recover for a week. My temple's completion had touched some deep switch in the world's machinery, and the system, in its wisdom, chose that moment to unlock the wonder construction system for every player on the server. It credited the unlock, by name, to me. 8 million players opened their interfaces to find a new tab and a line of text explaining whom to thank. They called me the father of all players before the day was out, which is a horrifying nickname when you're 20, and my studio's response to the nickname was a unified festival of zero respect. Wangbo changed my contact entry to father and answers all my messages with, "Yes, father, we obey, father." Sun Mei commissioned a tiny shrine, a joke one, 3 centimeters tall, with a pebble in it, and placed it on my desk. The fairies, missing the joke entirely, began leaving smaller offerings at it. And now, there is a functioning micro-religion in my study that I am too polite to evict. Chen Wei simply appended the nickname to my file in his contact ledger, under known aliases, between 2 entries I was not supposed to see, which read, "Always right," and "Alien, unconfirmed." And World Domination's forum team ran polls about me for 6 straight days, and the polls themselves were a portrait of 8 million people processing a stranger. Day 1's poll was, "Is this real?" Day 2's was, "What faction is he?" Still, again, eternally. Day 3 asked, "Would you join his city if he opened it?" And the yes vote crossed 70% before anyone knew what joining would even mean. Day 4 got philosophical. Has one player ever mattered this much? With a comment war citing precedents that all fell apart under scrutiny. Day 5 was a fan art contest, which produced, among much else, a painting of a white-cloaked figure on a temple scaffold under a 5-colored flame that was so much better than the actual moment deserved that I bought the original anonymously, and it hangs in my study, where it embarrasses me professionally every single day. And Day 6's poll was one question, one word, the word from Hell's files and the guild president's file, and, for all I know, a god's file. The word my whole second life keeps generating in other people's handwriting. Who? And Blaze showed up in person to buy my surplus wonder data with a chest of gold and the haunted expression of a man who has stopped asking how. That transaction had a coda I enjoyed too much to omit. As Blaze's clerks counted out the chest, he lingered, uncharacteristically, and finally asked the question his guild had clearly drafted, focus-tested, and assigned to him, which was, "What do you actually want, Liu Chuan? Long-term. Name a number." And I gave him the honest answer, because honesty aimed correctly is the most destabilizing weapon I own. I said, "I want the world still standing in 3 years, and I'll spend your money to get it." He waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. He left with less certainty than he'd arrived with, which is the correct amount, and 2 days later his guild quietly doubled its standing offer for my consulting, because nothing terrifies money like a man with a mission statement. And a title floated down onto my status pane like a leaf. Yasha's Glory. A second special talent slot, a gift with no listed sender, which is the mother goddess's way of signing her work. The second talent slot under that title sat empty and shining like a keyhole, and I did not fill it that night, though I had candidates lined up from here to the horizon. A slot granted by the mother of everything, on the day my city lit, felt like a question more than a gift, as if the world was asking, "Now that you can be one more thing, founder, what will it be?" I decided the answer deserved better than a tired man's midnight enthusiasm. Some doors you open on a good morning, with your people around you, and your enemies watching, and your hands clean. That night, when the plaza finally emptied, I climbed the temple scaffold alone and sat under the 5-colored flame with the whole delta glittering below. My city, my absurd, impossible, mud-pit-born city, and I let myself have the moment. Below, in the finished temple, the shrine hall held its first night of candles, and I could see, through the open roof panels, the 2 statues my masons had raised on their own initiative flanking the mother goddess's flame. A small, dancing figure with dice in her hands, and a hooded scholar with a book, Luck and Magic, my 2 patient patronesses, rendered by fairy sculptors who had never seen either, and had, according to a warmth in my bracelet and a certain satisfied hum in the night air, gotten both of them exactly, flatteringly, right. Rewind to a man dying on a wall while the sky peeled open. Fast forward through a refugee camp, a fairy's gratitude, a candy miracle, a dragon the size of a cathedral, and here, a nation with my name in its founding stone, 3 years before the mist comes. I'm ahead of you this time, I told the dark on the horizon, and I intend to stay ahead. The dark, of course, had already answered in its way. Because sitting under that flame, I counted what the climb had cost and gathered, and the ledger of open accounts read like a war forecast. A true god of wind watching me with a scowl, his daughter waiting at the top of a tower with a smile I hadn't earned yet, and a timer I'd let lapse into something worse, an invitation. A titan on a stolen throne whose invoice I carried in a true god quest. An old knight on the Western Front, eating dust on half rations while his court sharpened knives behind him, whose granddaughter called me family. A prophet's dead curse, a locked-up rebel, a shelf of postponed apocalypses in my vault, and somewhere beneath all the maps, patient as interest, the thing that killed me once already. Let them come, all of them, in any order. Last time I met this world as a player, this time it meets an architect, and I've only just opened the office. Shenze found me on the scaffold a little after that, because of course he did, the man audits even my solitude. He stood beside me a while, small hands folded on the rail, looking down at the lamplit grid where 500 of his people were sleeping safe inside walls for the first time in their lives. And he said, "You know, Lord, I used to route my caravans by the lamps of other people's towns. I always wondered what it felt like to be inside the glow instead of counting it from the road." I asked him what it felt like. He thought about it with a merchant's care, the way he prices anything priceless. And then he said, warm and undeserved, and worth every year. We watched our lamps until sunrise, neither of us saying the other true thing, which is that glow is a supply line too. And we both intended to run it all the way north, to every slum and every cell and every wheel the tower still holds, no matter what's standing in the road. That's where I'll stop for tonight. City founded, family fed, gods watching, some fondly, one from a tower with his arms crossed, and every open account in my ledger patient and gathering and mine. The mist took everything from me once, on a schedule only I remember. 3 years out, it's coming back. It's going to find the schedule changed, the landlord new, and the entire world under renovation. Sleep badly, tower. The invitations are almost printed.